Good evening. Will the Standing Committee on Legislative Affairs please come to order? Our first item of business is the election of a Vice Chairperson. Are there any nominations? Honourable Minister Guimard.
I nominate MLA Mikuleski.
Are there any other nominations? Being none, Mr. Mikuleski has been nominated. Are there, hearing no other nominations, Mr. Mikuleski is elected Vice Chairperson. This meeting has been called to consider the following bills. Bill number 13, the Public Sector Construction Projects Tendering Act. Bill number 17, the Drivers and Vehicles Amendment Act. Bill number 20, the Vehicle Technology Testing Act, various acts amended. Bill number 23, the Highway Traffic Amendment Act, control of traffic by flag persons. Bill number 28, the Water Resources Administration Amendment Act. I would like to inform all in attendance of the provisions in our rules regarding the hour of adjournment. A standing committee meeting to consider a bill must not sit past midnight to hear public presentations or to consider clause by clause of a bill except by unanimous consent of the committee. Written submissions from the following persons have been received and distributed to committee members. Daryl Harrison, Winnipeg Construction Association on Bill 13. Yvette Milner, Merit Contractors Association of Manitoba on Bill 13. Nathan Kozlowski, CLAC Local 152 on Bill 13. Mike Martins, Progressive Contractors Association of Canada on Bill 13. Dennis Volkov, Association of Manitoba Municipalities on Bill 20. Does the committee agree to have these documents appear in the Hansard transcript of this meeting? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Prior to meeting with public presentations, I would like to advise members of the public regarding the process for speaking in a committee. In accordance with our rules, a time limit of 10 minutes has been allotted for presentations with another 5 minutes allowed for questions from committee members. If a presenter is not in attendance when their name is called, they will be dropped to the bottom of the list. If the presenter is not in attendance when their name is called a second time, they will be removed from the presenters list. The proceedings of our meetings are recorded in order to provide a verbatim transcript each time someone wishes to speak, whether it be an MLA or presenter. I first have to say the person's name. This is a signal for the Hansard recorder to turn the mics on and off. Also, if any presenter has any written materials for distribution to the committee, please send the file by email to the moderator, who will distribute it all to committee members. Thank you for your patience. We will now proceed with public presentations. I will now call on Paul Moist, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Manitoba, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Moist, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Paul Moist. I'm a research associate with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. We're a nonprofit independent research organization, and we provide public commentary on many issues, including Bill 13 tonight. We support the broad positions that have been outlined by the Manitoba Building Trades and the Manitoba Federation of Labour. Secondly, we oppose the ending of quality project labor agreements. Which have existed in Manitoba for over 50 years, and support good paying jobs, worker training, and safety on all government project construction sites. I also had distributed to committee members, in addition to this presentation, a bit of a historical document by author Doug Smith. Project labor agreements were brought into Manitoba by the Conservative government of Duff Roblin. Based on problems, and this article from Mr. Smith talks about problems at the Kelsey and Grand Rapids as those generating stations were being developed. We reject the characterization of PLAs as forced unionization. Manitoba courts have rejected this assertion by the merit contractors, as did the Supreme Court of Canada in refusing to hear their 2012 legal challenge. We oppose the damage that Bill 13 will impose on Manitoba's skilled trades workers, allowing private firms to pursue more profits by paying workers less is simply wrong, and it turns back the clock, as I say, over 5 decades. The article by Mr. Smith, which I've had circulated to each of you, is from 2017, And one quote from it, historically, the reason for PLAs, if wage rates were fixed, contractors would be obliged to compete based on skill and ability rather than their ability to cut wages. And that's part of Mr. Smith's passage. He talks about a former member of the legislature, the late David Orlico, who went on to a career as an MP, but in 1959, he was a member of the legislature for the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, and he spoke to the legislature about what was existing on hydro construction sites prior to Mr. Roblin's government bringing in project labor agreements. We think that Manitoba would be wise to look west to British Columbia. They have now enacted community benefit agreements in 2018, and 4 points on those include maximizing apprenticeship opportunities on major public infrastructure projects, priority hiring and training for Indigenous peoples and women, wage alignment to prevailing industry rates to promote good wages for all, wages able to support families. And lastly, every collective bargaining agreement must include a no strike clause, ensuring no labor disruptions once you've signed on to a project labor agreement. I'll wrap up, Mr. Chairman, by saying, like BC, Manitoba faces skilled trades shortages and a shortfall in terms of private sector apprenticeship opportunities. The COVID pandemic underlines the importance of strong support systems to sustain labor force participation rates. Building trades unions have invested millions in training facilities. It's interesting to note that many who are opposed to project labor agreements are not themselves involved in training skilled trades workers. For these groups, it's the bottom line only that is driving their opposition to project labor agreements. And this stance found its way into the Conservative Party election platform in 2016, when the PC said, competing in the election, quote, "Shop smarter with government purchasing by reducing the number of untendered contracts and ending forced unionization of company employees in order to work on public contracts." As mentioned, project labor agreements do not force unionization on anyone. They do promote fairness and prevent a free ride for those who do not invest in either trades training or apprenticeships. We submit that Bill 13 should be withdrawn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
Thank you for your presentations. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? Honourable Minister.
It's great to see you again. Very unique way of doing business these days, where we do it remotely. And anyway, nice to see you up on the screen. Thank you very much for your comments, and I will allow others on the committee to ask some questions.
Mr. Weep.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moist, for joining us here this evening. It is good to see you, and really good to have such a well-researched paper for us to digest as a committee. I'm always appreciative of the work that the CCPA does in terms of doing the research and making sure that everything that's presented here before the committee and in other formats is always well-researched and always something that we can rely on and we can work with as legislators. So this is very well presented. Thank you very much. My question is just about sort of the projects that would fall under these project labor agreements. Just wondering what the, sort of looking forward in terms of what we might expect in Manitoba. What are some of the projects that might be affected by this change and this actual ban of project labor agreements that's being proposed here by this legislation?
Mr. Moist.
Well, thank you for the question. And through the chair, two most recent examples that come to mind, and there's upcoming infrastructure that all parties are asking for. But the two expansions of the floodway since the flood of '97 were very labor-intensive projects, and they were encapsulated with project labor agreements. And hydro development projects, two of whom have recently been in the news a fair bit, they too had project labor agreements. Mayor Bowman spoke yesterday on the provincial budget, and he's talking about multi-billion-dollar requirements for correcting our North End treatment plant, separating sewers in the combined sewer systems in the older parts of Winnipeg. You can expect that those would be largely tendered projects to private firms. The public sector doesn't do massive projects like that, but they would fit right up in the ballpark of a project labor agreement. So Manitoba is, like all provinces, facing many infrastructure needs and asking of the federal government, quite appropriately, all parties in the legislature are doing this, quite appropriately, asking for support from the federal government to build our province. And these massive projects, not small-scale projects, but massive construction projects, Mr. Premier Roblin decided to take wage competition out of the picture by signing project labor agreements. It's no different than the current government bringing in place a mandatory requirement for paramedics to join the College of Paramedics that they formed since 2016. There's many things in society that are mandatory. In the case of paramedics, the province, in their wisdom, has decided that there should be a central body that, for professional reasons, all paramedics must belong to. Project labor agreements mean that all workers belong to them and enjoy a living wage. They do not have to sign a union card. They should, in my view, but there is no forced unionization. But as Justice Ivan Rand decided in the 1950s, nor is there a free ride. All members will pay dues because they benefit from the negotiations, in this case, of the building trades. And if it's fine in society to have mandatory affiliation to various bodies, and I believe it is in the public interest, it's absolutely in the public interest to have fair wages and not to have a race to the bottom for any worker in Manitoba.
Mr. Gerard.
Mute. There we go. Now, my question, Mr. Moist, is this. If you can provide a little bit more detail. I see that this article talks about the fact that the construction of the Kelsey and Grand Rapids hydro stations were marked by conflicts and controversies that proved embarrassing to the provincial government and to Manitoba Hydro. Can you expand a little bit about what happened at those two dams that was the starting point for having project labor agreements? What sort of problems were there?
Mr. Moist, and if I can ask you just to answer the question quickly, as your time will be running out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the question. MLA Orlico in 1959 was barred by the companies from attending on site. He was up there visiting workers. He was then allowed in to see the workers at Kelsey. He reported back to the legislature 7-day-a-week operations, daily shifts of 11.5 hours, and under certain provisions, a maximum work week of 80.5 hours at straight time rates. They talked about forestry workers clearing the bush up there for the construction of the hydro project, supposed to be paid $150 a week, but the contractor took half of that and paid them $75. On paper, it appeared that the forestry workers were making X, but the testimony of Mr. Orlico was they were making Y. So there were countless examples of shoddy treatment of workers on these sites.
Hi.
And
thank you,
the
Mr. Moist. Thank you. The time for questions is over for this presenter. I will now call on Kevin Rebick, Manitoba Federation of Labor, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Rebick, go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you. The Manitoba Federation of Labor is Manitoba's central labor body. We represent the interests of over 100,000 Manitoban workers, and we're firmly opposed to this bill, as it will ban the decades-long tradition of using project labor agreements, or PLAs, to build large public infrastructure projects in our province. PLAs ensure good jobs for Manitobans and proper training and safety on public infrastructure projects. It's disappointing that the Pallister government would let its narrow ideological vision cloud its judgment and fail to support Manitoba's skilled workers. By balancing value for taxpayers with investment in Manitoba workers, these agreements benefit working families, our economy, and all Manitobans who benefit from the vital infrastructure that's built to last by workers who make a decent living. Manitoba's labor movement has been clear all along that PLAs are the right way to go because they've served Manitobans well for decades. To put it plainly, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Cornell University conducted a comprehensive study of PLAs in 2011. They examined 185 PLA jobs in the United States. It concluded that PLAs benefit everyone involved: the construction industry, contractors, workers, local communities, and taxpayers. The Cornell report stated that the reason for the industry's reliance on PLAs is clear. They provide value for government and the industry by producing the best work for the money with on-time, on-budget performance. Because PLAs are negotiated pre-bid and tailored to the needs of projects, they give project owners, contractors, and workers a unique opportunity to avoid potential problems that might put up roadblocks once a project's underway. They prevent fly-by-night contractors from driving down wages and providing poorly trained workers to win contracts. And they provide the best value to Manitobans for large-scale construction projects. They also ensure that workers are paid fairly, benefiting our economy by providing good jobs for Manitobans. These agreements have delivered valuable and vital infrastructure for decades, since being introduced to Manitoba by progressive Conservative Premier Duff Roblin to build the floodway. Under a PLA, common wages and working conditions are established for large groups of contractors and a diverse transient workforce by requiring all contractors to pay fair wages under one collective agreement. Contractors are selected for productivity and quality, not just price. PLAs consistently deliver high-quality roads, hospitals, and other infrastructure. Work environment on these projects are complex, and dozens of employers and hundreds to thousands of workers may come in and out over a long period of time, like a Manitoba hydro dam. In such complex work environments, PLAs provide for stability through consistent labor standards, wages, and human resource procedures and practices, while also guaranteeing there will be no strikes or lockouts for the full duration of each project. Without PLAs, governments will inherit unknown risks, creating significant uncertainty about costs, quality, and timelines on Manitoba construction projects. And while right-wing commentators and this government continue to peddle the myth that these agreements are forced unionization under PLAs, any contractor, small or large, union or non-union, is free to bid for work. If they win a tender, then they're required to pay fair wages to their workers and pay a fair share of the cost of training workers. Thankfully, some members of this government have seen the light. For instance, the previous Minister of Infrastructure had the courage to tell the truth in the face of this false rhetoric. According to then Minister of Infrastructure Blaine Peterson's comments in Hansard from June 28, 2016, there is no forced unionization in a project labor agreement. In a project labor agreement, there is not a compulsion to join the union. That's what he said. I'd encourage the current Minister of Infrastructure to follow the lead of his predecessor and admit the truth. And to put some more facts on the table to dispute this government's bogus rhetoric, more than 77% of contractors at the floodway expansion and Kiosk Dam projects have been non-union contractors. PLAs should be maintained in this province. They have tremendous value to Manitobans. They've provided tremendous value to Manitobans for decades by ensuring workers are paid fairly and by investing heavily in training and skill development. The focus on highly skilled labor delivers high productivity to large-scale construction projects. In fact, the recent floodway expansion under the NDP government came in $38 million under budget, demonstrating the productive value of PLAs. We know that governments look to find savings on each and every infrastructure project, but shortchanging Manitoban workers and compromising on quality is not the answer. Time and again, we've seen that cheap labor is not skilled labor, and skilled labor is not cheap. Ask anyone who's had a bad experience with a home renovation. It's better in the long run to pay for the job to be done right the first time than to have to pay twice to fix someone's shoddy work. I want to focus my comments on 3 key benefits of PLAs: local jobs for Manitoban workers, training and skill development, and workplace safety. Manitobans want their government to invest in creating good-paying local jobs for Manitoba workers. Manitoba workers who are building the infrastructure we all rely on deserve family-supporting jobs, and PLAs ensure that's the case. Bill 28 will leave us vulnerable to more out-of-province workers, leaving fewer high-skilled, high-paying jobs for Manitoba families to benefit from. Why is the government of Manitoba wanting to make it harder for Manitobans to get good family-supporting jobs? Supporting local job creation means more of the wages of public projects paid to workers stays in Manitoba and in our economy. PLAs are also effective in engaging Indigenous workers, as was the case during the floodway expansion project. Manitobans want to know that their government is prioritizing Manitoba's workers and Manitoba's communities first when it comes to building public infrastructure. PLAs do exactly this by setting clear standards that protect local employment opportunities and mandate safe, high-quality construction projects that are built to last. If local workers can't benefit from local builds, the Manitoba workforce and economy cannot meet their potential. And if local workers can't benefit from local construction, the Manitoba workforce and economy cannot meet their potential. Another key benefit of PLAs are the training opportunities they provide for workers from all walks of life, including youth, veterans, women, new Canadians, Indigenous people, and visible minorities access to training, apprenticeship, and career advancement. We know that in today's economy, training and apprenticeship are key to supporting meaningful work for underrepresented populations and help young people build their futures right here at home. That's why all governments of all political stripes have relied on PLAs. Contractors partner together to focus on training and skill development through PLAs. So these projects consistently deliver higher value for money. These investments deliver the most highly skilled and productive workforce in the industry, translating into higher productivity. PLAs ensure we continue to develop talent in the industry. Contractors who want to grow their business make significant investments in developing cutting-edge training facilities for apprentices and tradespeople. One of the biggest challenges facing the construction industry today is the need for more skilled workers. PLAs include provisions for workplace development and apprenticeship programs that train workers for careers in construction using formal standardized curriculums. It's one of the most significant benefits of PLAs. A highly skilled workforce not only helps to finish projects on time and on budget, but also helps to create a culture of safety on the job site. All workers deserve to come home safely every night to their homes and loved ones. And when it comes to protecting the safety of workers on the job, PLAs work well because they provide for consistent safety standards across the board and establish committees and forward-thinking protections to address safety and health issues. Getting rid of PLAs would mean more workers in Manitoba would see their right to a health and safety workplace at risk. Safety standards mandated by PLAs are transparent and accountable, with common understandings over what safety means being shared across a project. Getting rid of PLAs would mean more workers in Manitoba would see their right to a healthy, safe workplace put at risk. The MFL believes that this government should withdraw this proposed legislation because it's a bad bill for Manitoba workers in our economy. It will only lead to greater use of cheap and out-of-province labor and lower safety and training standards on job sites across the province. We urge this government to follow in the footsteps of previous progressive conservative governments, like those of Duff Roblin, Sterling Lyon, and Gary Filmon, and continue to go with what works when it comes to the building infrastructure we all benefit from, rather than pursuing a narrow ideological agenda that will hurt our economy. The move to ban PLAs is a move towards instability for our workers and communities. This bill is not worth the risk to Manitoba workers or to our economy. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rebeck, and great to see you at committee. Would really appreciate it if we could have everybody back here in this room like the good old days, but this is the way we're doing business right now. Great to see you at least on screen. I did want to just sort of reference the previous speaker spoke about the BC example and the need for PLA to protect wages. And that's probably because in BC they don't have prevailing legislation, which we have here. So in your, it's the 5th paragraph, you mentioned that fly-by-night contractors could drive down wages. That actually wouldn't be the case because we have prevailing legislation which protects workers' wages, and it is protected right there. So I just wanted to make that comment. And all that this does is it says that when contractors or individuals put in bids, that their union status is not one of the considerations for getting the job. It does not mean that there's less safety or less wages or any of that. Those standards still apply as they do today. So I guess we can agree to disagree. Great to see you again, and thanks for being here.
Mr. Rebeck.
Yes, although we do have a Construction Industry Wages Act that creates a real floor that wages can't be dirt cheap or minimum wage, it still can drive down wage costs. And rather than competing on just who gives you the cheapest option of work labor, you can get quality standards that everyone makes a fair and living wage that's consistent, and that driving costs down isn't the reason someone might be successful getting a bid.
Mr. Wiebe.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rebeck, for your presentation. It was very comprehensive, I guess I would say, and to me lays out a pretty solid case for continuing what's already working. And in fact, what's in the past been supported across the board, and really hasn't been a partisan issue. It's really been about, as you said, the quality of the work and controlling costs and making sure that there was some predictability there. What I did want to ask you about, though, is specifically about workplace safety and health. I know the MFL has done a great job in promoting workplace safety and health. It's been a big priority. And I just wanted to maybe give you a few more minutes just to kind of dig into that, exactly how project labor agreements can ensure that workers are safe, and that's a priority for anyone that's doing work on any one of these projects in Manitoba.
Mr. Rebeck.
Thank you. Yes, a project labor agreement creates a collective agreement, a clear set of expectations and standards that all contractors will adhere to. So you're setting up health and safety committees that are going to meet regularly and deal with things. It also can create standards that can ensure we have a one-to-one ratio now that we no longer have that as a legal requirement.
That's right.
In the province of Manitoba. We could, in a project labor agreement, ensure that electricians are going to be working on a one-to-one basis to be safe and not be at risk when they're working as a third-year apprentice and not off working on their own. We can make sure that they are protected and given guidance and instruction that keeps them safe. Having a project labor agreement gives you some clear parameters, direction, and processes to deal with and create space for you to bring forward health and safety issues and concerns.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Rebeck, the contracts that we have in place now and which would be going with in the future, the contracts lay out the safety requirements and expectations and standards. All of that still applies. So what would be the difference between a PLA or a regular contract when the only difference is that the status, the unionization or non-unionization status, is not one of the things that would be considered when all the safety requirements, the wages are still, the prevailing legislation is still in place. So what really changes other than that you can't use the unionized status or the non-unionized status as being one of the things that gives you a leg up on getting the contract? All the rest of it stays. All of the expectations and standards, safety requirements, and wages.
Mr. Rebeck.
So one of the things that would change would be the process. So under a project labor agreement, people are not forced to join a union, but they are given a collective agreement that includes processes like a grievance process, like protection, like knowing that someone has their back if they speak out, and they can be free from retribution or other actions that might come back to them because they have a third party who can also intervene and help enforce and ensure safety standards are being met. It's one thing to have them on paper. It's another thing to know that you have the ability to raise those concerns, bring them forward, and have advocates and experts that can lend their support and help make sure that they're adhered to.
Mr. Rebeck, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I will now call on the next presenter. Next presenter is Sandhu, Manitoba Building Trades. I'll ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Sandhu, please proceed with your presentation.
Good evening again. I appear before you representing 13 Manitoba skilled trades unions and their 10,000 members. You will hear a lot of facts presented to you today, and I appreciate the information that's been tabled by and presented in person, at least over Zoom, by Mr. Moist and Mr. Rebeck. You will hear a lot of facts, and you will have a lot of opinions before you. And I will note that the opinions that you have as a committee and as a legislature will be in writing, and those that are presenting facts will be standing themselves personally before you through the electronic medium. So I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to rehash the facts that we've discussed, and Minister, you will know we have gone over these facts with you many times, and I've always appreciated the opportunity to do so. But let's take a different approach to this. Let's appeal to something else other than facts and opinions. So Manitoba Building Trades, in late 2020, we opened one of Canada's largest privately owned trades technical training facilities. There's nothing like this in Canada. It was privately paid for with private money without going to any level of government to ask for any subsidy whatsoever. I would like you to compare that record with many corporate entities that invest in our provinces and what they seek in return. We asked for nothing. We invested in our province. So from the outset, we wanted this facility not only to be a center of excellence for trades training, we wanted this facility to be connected with our community. We wanted to acknowledge the roots of not only our people, but Manitobans, Canadians who have made significant differences to our lives and to our communities. So in order to do that acknowledgement, to build that connection, our facility has many spaces named after important Manitobans and Canadians. These are people who changed our lives, who built our systems, who built our democracy. I'll name a few of them for you. These people include Sergeant Tommy Prince, a decorated war hero, from whom at least one of 3 people who have a street named after them. We wanted to acknowledge Sergeant Tommy Prince for what he has done. And Mr. Chair, given your military service, you'll know why that's important. There are spaces named after Louis Riel, who's widely acknowledged as having created our province. There's J.S. Woodsworth, there's Nellie McClung, there's Helen Armstrong, just to name a few. And then there's one particular name that has a strong connection to what is before us today, Bill 13. One of the spaces in our facility is named after Premier Doug Roblin. Premier Roblin was a person of courage. Both speakers before me have referred to Premier Roblin. He was a person of courage, conviction, foresight. He declined to be beholden to narrow interests or any group, and instead did what was good for Manitoba. He had the vision to forge ahead with the floodway. And as he did so, he also had the vision to introduce project labor agreements, what are now commonly in modern parlance called community benefits agreements. So that's his legacy. And as today's legislators, I would like you to think of your own legacy. Will your name end up in buildings or on buildings 50 years after you are done serving? You carry an important torch for all of us. You are our representatives. And your legacy is what will shape our life 50 years from now, not mine. I have enough gray hairs to not have expectation to be around 50 years hence. But my children will. Will they remember your names? I say this with the greatest of respect. Passing legislation like Bill 13 will not create a legacy worth remembering or acknowledging. Not a year from now, certainly not 50 years from now. You have choices to make as to how you wish to be remembered and what you wish to be remembered for. A few points I just want to lay before you. There is no law, there never has been a law in Manitoba that required or imposed the requirement to have a project labor agreement or community benefits agreements for that matter. There has never been a law. Yet, we are here today contemplating a law to prohibit something that has never been required by law. I've spoken to, again, many of you in person, and the factual and evidentiary foundation of Bill 13 that you have in writing before you from the supporters that want this legislation, it is a house of sand, it's a house of cards. It has no factual basis and foundation. Yet here we are, insistent on passing legislation that has no purpose, no value, no rhyme, no reason, and certainly is not a legacy worth building. Yet again, here we are. We expect that the interests that are pressing for this vacant law will prevail, and we expect they will prevail. And they will be pleased with what they have accomplished. But I will tell you what will not happen in the future. Both speakers before me referenced kiosk. Mr. Schuler, that is a project that is in your portfolio. I am proud to say, under the collective agreement and the project labor agreements and the community benefits components of that agreement that have prevailed at kiosk, we have celebrated now well over 10 million Indigenous hours worked on that project in good, well-paid, meaningful work. That's the legacy that's worth noting. So when it comes to your legacy, this act will ring very hollow. Please forgive me for saying so, but that is as hard a fact as others that have been presented to you before. This is an ordinary act. It's an ordinary piece of legislation, and it has no extraordinary vision or thought behind it to justify it or to give it purpose today or 100 years from now. This legislature, your legislature, our representatives, you ought to be more. You ought to pursue higher ideals and pursuits than allowing a narrow constituency that has built a fallacious argument that somehow project labor agreements and community benefits agreements harm us when they do things like generate over 10 million hours on a single project for a constituency that is desperate for work. We simply ask you to stop. Please just set this aside. Do something that takes courage. Do something extraordinary. Set this aside. There are people that will be upset with you if you do so. But I will challenge you on one point. They say they will save you money in the absence of community benefits agreements and project labor agreements. They will not quantify in any of their written submissions as to how much money they will be saving this province, saving you as a government, and saving the rest of us as taxpayers, because that is fallacy. It is fictitious. Those numbers have never been true. And Minister, I don't want to address the question you raised to a prior speaker, but project labor agreements in Manitoba have never, ever, ever, in fact, we would argue it would violate Manitoba's Human Rights Code for the union status of any bidder to be taken into account. That has never been true. That is one of the fictitious things that has been bandied about by those who are proponents for this bill. It is complete fiction. It has never been true. I will stop here. Thank you for your indulgence. And I just hope that it is disheartening to be at this point and to be at this stage as a Manitoban, forget our respective roles on our day-to-day jobs, that when facts give way and yield to fiction, we all lose. And I hope you will not let that happen. I will stop there and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committees have questions for the presenter? Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sandhu, and great to see you. It would be nice to have you at committee. And no, Mr. Moist and Mr. Rebeck also did theirs remote. They were not in the room. And so just to make that clear, they were not here. But great to see you, and hopefully at some point in time we can get back to normal committees and can greet you here in person. I just wanted to be very clear that this isn't fictional, that we're talking about, in fact, under the Burntwood-Nelson Agreement, 12.2.1. I'd like to read, except as provided in letter of agreement. Number 3, all employees shall, as a condition of employment and or continuing employment, be members or obtain membership in the appropriate union of the council and maintain such membership in good standing. 12.2.2, the contractor shall, at the time of hire, advise all employees who are not members of the appropriate union that they are required to secure such membership within 30 calendar days of being hired. So it's actually in the Burntwood-Nelson Agreement. I mean, it is there. I don't think that we're saying a unionized or non-unionized status compromises or harms anybody or any construction project. All what we are talking about is that there be a matter of choice. And we believe that this is an issue of choice I understand that for some this is a little bit more emotional, and I always appreciate our conversations. I know how passionate you are about this, but this is really about choice, and that whether it's a unionized or non-unionized business should not play into whether or not somebody can bid and get the contract. And Mr. Rebeck admitted that you had to join a union. He said so himself that then you had somebody who had your back, and the union can't have your back if you're not a union member. So Mr. Rebeck admits it. It's part of the Burntwood-Nelson Agreement. There are precedents where you had to have a union card membership to be able to work on these sites. So yes, the forced unionization is real. It's not fictional. Great to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Mr. Sandhu.
Thank you, Minister, and I as well. It's always a pleasure to see you in person. I look forward to when this is past us, and we do. You're absolutely correct. For the duration of a project, after a union or a non-union contractor is selected, they must work under common terms. Imagine, Mr. Minister, if you had a 30%, I've worked in these environments. I've worked for the City of Winnipeg. I've managed labor relations and collective agreements as a manager at the City of Winnipeg. It is a painful exercise to manage multiple collective agreements in the same department. Imagine doing so in a project that has 3,000 workers at peak and 32 different HR systems in place. What the PLA, what the Burnt BNA has done is imposed a singular set of human resource policies, procedures, and systems in place. And if those who call that force unionized cannot see the value, they need to have walked in my shoes as a manager, managing union collective agreements or non-union collective agreements where multiple systems exist. It is devastating. So in that context, and it should be very clear that any contractor that comes under the BNA and works at a hydro project, the minute they leave, they are non-union. That does not carry forward with them. And as unions, we are prohibited from organizing any contractor who happens to be non-union but is working under a collective agreement at Kiosk, for example. We are bound not to try to organize them. So in fact, it gives you an immunity card if you're a non-union contractor to come work at Kiosk under a collective agreement. So these are nuanced issues, Mr. Minister, and there are multiple facets to this. It is, I just don't like simple buzz phrases like forced unionization because they detract from nuanced, thoughtful discussion and they don't contribute anything to it. I regret to say this, but that's just my view.
Mr. Wiebe.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sandhu, for joining us here again. I'm not sure if this bill in a previous iteration ended up coming to committee, but I've certainly heard your passionate words before. Both on a personal level, but in the media and elsewhere. And I think you've done a really good job of sort of boiling it down. And, the minister might say that, you're emotional or it's an emotional issue, but I think what you're doing is you're trying to put a human face to the membership that you represent and let us know as a committee just how this is going to affect so many hardworking Manitobans. So I think you've done a really good job in laying all of that out, and I appreciate your time. I think you've also done a good job in sort of laying out exactly how this protects both unionized and non-unionized workers, and I agree with your point 100% that sort of buzzword, snippet kind of language doesn't really help anybody. And I think what you're trying to do here is do best for both Manitoban taxpayers and for the workers who are going to perform these jobs. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank you and just say that you know that we've stood shoulder to shoulder with you and with others who have called this bill out, and we stood up against this bill. As a majority government, the government can continue to plow through and push ahead. But I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you've done on the ground. We're going to continue to stand with you here in the legislature every step of the way.
The time for questions for this presenter is over. I will now call upon Tanya Paulson, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Ms. Tanya Paulson, please proceed with your presentation.
Great, thank you. And thank you for having me, Chairperson, Vice Chair, and Standing Committee members. My name is Tanya Paulson, and I'm here speaking as a concerned private citizen, as well as contributing to the statements made on behalf of Manitoba Building Trades, of which I am a part of, as well as our 13-member unions. Again, I want to just reiterate a bit of who we are. And Seder just spoke previously, so some of this will have been covered, but together with our affiliate unions, we represent roughly 10,000 skilled trades professionals. And as a private sector entity, we work as a human resource and project partner with many of the large unionized general contractors in Manitoba. And we are the only construction association that represents the needs and interests of on-the-tool, on-the-ground workers. Our tradespeople work in industrial, commercial, institutional sector of the construction industry. So they build big. They're the ones who build schools, hospitals, entertainment complexes, power generating stations, and more of the critical infrastructure our province relies on. As a provincial council, we have our eye on workforce development of both current and prospective skilled trades workers in Manitoba. Nationally, we're facing a skilled trades worker shortage due largely to increasing rate of retirement and decreasing apprenticeship entry and completion. The same holds true for Manitoba. These two factors, entry into the workforce and apprenticeship completion, are the best methods of ensuring that we have a local skilled workforce who's able to continue to build the critical infrastructure of our province. With an equity lens, but also the reality of changing demographics, it's necessary that women, Indigenous people, and other marginalized groups be attracted to and supported in their trades careers. Bill 13 would destabilize a method of achieving these important outcomes, project labor agreements, making them in their traditional form illegal, but also creating a barrier for similar forms of labor management, as well as opportunity generation and recruitment of underrepresented groups in the form of community benefits agreements, which are procurement tools that are rapidly gaining popularity in many jurisdictions across Canada, both federally, provincially, and municipally, for their social outcomes and their long-term downstream cost savings for government services like health and justice. But some important things about project labor agreements in construction specifically, and a lot of these have been touched on already, and I'm sure will be touched on and reiterated with speakers following myself. But I want to talk about the training and apprenticeship opportunities, the recruitment of local workers, particularly Northern and Indigenous, and the safety protocol that that your affiliation assures that all members follow. So one, PLAs are critical to help workers develop their skills on the job site. This is critical for training apprentices who can often then gain the experience they need for each level within the duration of one or two big projects. And as Seder had mentioned, we have seen many Indigenous workers enter through work readiness programs in advance of kiosk, knowing that there was a mandate to hire Indigenous workers. And those workers have been able to complete or be close to completing their levels on a project and achieving Journey Person or Red Seal status. Without a PLA, this would not have happened in the North, especially where there is much less opportunity to start an apprenticeship program, much less get enough hours to become a Journey Person or Red Seal in a trade. So losing this ability would be a detrimental loss to a very relatively simple, maybe not simple, but something that's used in other jurisdictions to see this value. And it's something that will get lost when we're spending public dollars on a project. We're not going to be able to see as much benefits or those intangible benefits that could be produced through a PLA or a community benefits agreement. Secondly, PLAs ensure that Manitoba workers get work first for the most part. And this has not always been the case. Manitobans will and continue to lose out on jobs that are built right in their backyard. And this is especially important for Manitobans and minority groups that depend on labor agreements to break the cycle of unemployment. And we still see this happening on current projects like the Women's Hospital and then municipally in Winnipeg, South End Water Treatment Plant, where it was in primarily from workers outside of Manitoba. So it's just a matter of where do we want to put our hard-earned tax dollars I know myself, I would rather see it paying the pockets of somebody who lives down the street from me than somebody who lives in Minnesota or Alberta. And lastly, without PLAs, there's no guarantee for local jobs, construction quality, or project safety. PLAs are an effective labor management tool that provides predictability and stability to large projects. They guarantee the same standards of safety and oversight and wages and benefits for everybody working on a construction site, without which workers are left vulnerable and projects are open to delays, resentment between workers, mistrust, and a high worker turnover. By building infrastructure through PLAs, quality is added to the equation. When quality is not assured, we all lose. And when using taxpayer dollars for projects, it is imperative that corners are not cut. Long-term quality is the most important thing to consider when building Manitoba infrastructure. We want things that are built to last. So in conclusion, Bill 13 will have irreversibly negative implications for our local jobs, our project quality and project cost, and the safety of our construction sites. Manitoba workers and communities deserve better, especially in the current crisis that we remain in during this pandemic. Our members play an imperative role in Manitoba's infrastructure future for the good of our workers and for our communities. We just ask that this please vote against this bill. And yeah, I'm open to any questions or any follow-up comments as well.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for this presenter? Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Ms. Paulson, and appreciate you being here and doing it remotely. It's a new way of doing business here. I appreciate your comments. I do want to make it very clear, however, that our contracts lay out the safety requirements and the expectations and standards, all which apply. So a project labor agreement isn't what sets out the safety requirements, it's the contract. So all of those things apply. So the fact that we're not going to require you to be a unionized shop wouldn't change the safety standards. And I just wanted to make that very clear for the record. Also, the apprenticeship for First Nations or targets thereof, that can also be part of the contract and often, or in most cases, usually is. I have a question for you. So if a company need not be a union shop to bid on a project, but will have to be a union shop if successful. Mr. Sandhu said they can't unionize. There's a bit of a moratorium. How long is that moratorium for? Do you know?
I personally don't know. Oh, sorry. I personally don't know the answer to that. That's not my wheelhouse. I'm not the labor relations expert at the building trades. But if I could comment on safety and some clarification, I think that it's less about obviously the standards of safety, and that's going to be standardized when you go into a project, either by the contractor, the project owner, or the GC. But imagining a scenario in terms of managing safety and managing workers on a job site that go outside of the actual on the tool safety, but you have a bunch of guys who are technically doing the same trade, but they're all employed by different contractors, all making variable wages, and all having to have different points of contact for how to go about their day-to-day lives at a work camp that has 3,000 people at it. Whereas where I have been able to observe from a relatively outside perspective is when there are issues, for example, at kiosk, you have a central collective agreement that outlines either revisions or updates, and you have all of the workers being managed in one current stream and one process and one source of information. And they all have the same expectations, they all have the same standards, and that's just as important for when they're not currently on the job site, when they're back at camp, when they're using camp facilities, as it is for when they're on the tools or when they're in their crews out actually building. And also additionally on the apprenticeship question, it is concerning as there are other actions being held in some other bills, including Bill 55, which basically revokes the requirement for the province of Manitoba to employ apprentices on public projects. So if that were to be removed from Bill 55, and if there were some more legislation to support apprentices outside of a project labor agreement, then yes, I think that comment would stand, and there would be enough consideration given to Indigenous workers. But we have seen other actions by the government, specifically in Bill 55, that would sort of negate any oversight of the apprenticeship process, whereas a PLA on a specific project would be able to manage that as a requirement on contractors who are coming on for the project.
Mr. Gerard.
Yes. I've seen work environments in Manitoba where employers have decided to hire a lot of part-time people as opposed to full-time people, probably partly to decrease the costs of benefits, but their quality of work has suffered dramatically. And I wondered if you would comment on how project labor agreements deal with this issue.
Yeah, and I won't oh, sorry, I cut you off again. This is my first time presenting at committee, so I appreciate.
Ms. Paulson? Ms. Paulson, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So on that, and again, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an exact expert. I don't have the BNA in front of me right now, but I do know that within our unionized collective agreements, and that also applies then to an agreement like the Berwyn-Nelson agreement, there is mandated requirements to advance apprentices. There are mandated requirements to hire Indigenous people as apprentices, and as such, advance them. A very common trend we see in our industry anecdotally is that when you advance levels, it is legislated that there's a certain wage requirement to advance those apprentices. So it becomes a barrier for apprentices when an employer is looking at their average crew rate and not wanting to pay a fourth level apprentice when they can come in and get a second level apprentice for a lower wage rate to do that same amount, in which case they would let the fourth level apprentice go, and that apprentice is then struggling to find another job with enough hours for them to reach journeyperson status. And that happens often at different levels.
Thank you, Ms. Paulson.
Yeah.
Your time for questions are over.
Order, Mr.
Mr. Weeb, on a point of order?
Yeah, I appreciate that we have a number of members here that want to ask questions. I think it's appropriate that the actual members of this committee, myself, my colleague on our side, and from their side would be, first to ask questions. I understand there might have been some confusion about that, but what I would like to do is maybe just ask for leave that I could ask my question and at least thank the presenter for coming this evening.
There is no point of order, but I ask leave for the committee if Mr. Weeb can allow him to ask a question. Honorable Minister?
Agreed.
Leave has been granted. Mr. Weeb.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to the committee. I just wanted to simply thank you, Ms. Paulson. I did have some questions about, you talked about training and about a skills shortage in Manitoba. I think these are really important points, and I did hope that we had a little bit more time to delve into those. Maybe if you could, I know the time of the committee is short, but if we could just, anything that you can lend in terms of how these project labor agreements benefit the training and address that skill shortage that you identified in your presentation.
Ms. Paulson.
Yeah, very briefly, similarly to my response to Mr. Gerard, is that rather than it being, for lack of a better word, a free-for-all, and for the independent either contractors or the workers themselves to sort of negotiate that whole process, a project labor agreement puts training as a high priority, as seen as a benefit that's going to come out of a labor agreement for a massive project that would actually give people enough hours to advance in their training and give them enough opportunity to try the different variety of skills that they need to be completing at those levels in order to advance. And without an oversight of without a commitment to that at a large scale and as an outcome of the project at the very beginning, it's difficult, if not impossible, to manage that and have the same successful outcomes in terms of advancement and training.
Thank you, Ms. Paulson. The time for questions for this presenter is over. I will now call upon Mr. Chris Larenc, President of the Manitoba Heavy Construction Association. Mr. Larenc And I'll ask moderator if they could invite them to the meeting, and please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Lorink, please proceed with your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Chris Lawrence. I'm president of the Manitoba Heavy Construction Association. The MHCA, which represents the heavy civil sector and its supply side in Manitoba, is pleased to present in support of Bill 13. Bill 13 preserves choice and ensures that all employees and their employers have the opportunity to bid work and work on public projects in Manitoba without being required to join or pay dues to a building trades union. Most employees in Manitoba's construction industry do not belong to a building trades union, and they do so by the exercise of their choice. These are skilled tradespeople working for employers who meet or exceed legislated safety standards, pay good wages and benefits, and strive for workplace and project excellence. In Manitoba, the open shop construction sector includes small, medium, and large businesses engaged in heavy civil and in the industrial, commercial, and residential construction projects. They and their workforce, in the majority, who have chosen to work without union representation, build our bridges, fix our roads, and develop and build residential and commercial properties, effectively, all aspects of construction. Bill 13 ensures that these employers, and more importantly, their employees, can work on public projects without being required to join a union or pay dues to a union they choose not to belong to. Bill 13 ensures that the employers and employees have an opportunity to work on public projects without having a labor model imposed upon their workplaces by the ideology of any government. Bill 13 is about enabling free choice, and I submit that is an important legacy. Respectfully, despite what opponents may argue, this is a good thing, an important legacy. It is obvious that when more of industry is allowed to participate, competition intensifies, bidding is more intense, and concurrently investment in innovation and productivity increase. This is accomplished while wages and benefits to workers are at or above compensation offered by those covered in collective bargaining agreements. Bill 13 does not eliminate project labor agreements, but rather allows the successful bidder to determine the labor management model it will employ to do the job. The MHCA has consistently supported open, unfettered competitive bidding of all publicly funded infrastructure projects. The choice to organize or not is for the worker, not for government to make. We support the following core principles. Construction project contracts should be awarded to the lowest qualifying bidder. Policies and legislation of the government should promote open tendering. The government should not be prescribing through policy, legislation, or regulation whether or not a company or its workforce must be open shop or unionized to work on a project. Respectfully, the Manitoba government is doing the right thing with Bill 13, and we would suggest that most Manitobans agree that government should abandon any policy of required unionization or forcing workers to pay union dues to be allowed to work in favor of one that protects choice. Bill 13 does this and is an important step in the right direction. I have worked with Sandhu, with Kevin Rebick, and with Paul Moist. I've seen their presentations. I have great respect for them, but I also respectfully disagree and part company with their views on Bill 13. Reference to 1959, frankly, is of little probative value. 1959 is 62 years ago. Different or no labor legislation. We didn't have in place safety standards or safety programs. We had no Construction Industry Wages Act. And yes, Premier Roblin did have the courage to institute a project labor agreement because he had no legislative or regulatory framework within which to work. To suggest that that continues to be the case today and is resolved by PLAs is frankly inaccurate. And as for the floodway, we were there when the government of the day, Premier Dewar, began by attempting to force unionization on as a condition of being able to bid the floodway work. And our association and others took up that challenge, and the public frankly supported us in saying you should not and will not force companies to become unionized just to bid the floodway project. Insofar as education and training is concerned, the Manitoba Heavy Construction Association, Merit Winnipeg Construction, and others have each industry funded and delivered for decades since 1990, robust education and training, whether for safety, as we started in 1991, and all you need to do is ask the WCB and inquire about the significant reduction in frequency, duration, and severity of accidents. Our safety programs became the model for safe work to be built. We have a technical vocational institute accredited by the Department of Education, which we instituted some 20 years ago. We are a founding member of the Manitoba Construction Sector Council, of which Manitoba Home Builders and Winnipeg Construction as well are founding members. So to suggest that industry does not invest in education and training is simply false. What the government is doing is correct. It builds choice. That is an important legacy. We are in a democracy. We support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence, and great to see you this evening. Like with the other presenters, it would have been really neat to have had you here and be able to speak to you directly, but we've got you on screen, so I guess that's second best. Great to have you here. There seem to be some misconceptions about Bill 13. We've heard that safety requirements would no longer apply, and we've pointed out that those are not PLA things, those are actually contracts. It's built into the contract. We've heard about standards, that those would slip, and those are also covered by contracts. We also heard that workers' wages would go down, that there would be a cannibalizing of workers' wages. Unfortunately, it wasn't mentioned that there's prevailing legislation that sets out workers' wages. I do want to ask you if you could kind of reference those, and I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that worker training does take place by industry. It is done in partnership with WCB and others. So we appreciate that on the labor side, they have a very robust training process, as we do on the industry side, so that we would always ensure that we have trained workers. That's also part of the contract, that you must have a trained workforce. And we do have inspectors that go and make sure that they are doing the job appropriately. So if you could kind of just weigh in on those very briefly, and I know the opposition wants to ask you a question as well. Thank you for being here. Great to see you.
Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Minister. I want to focus on safety. Since 1990, our association and the Winnipeg Construction Association have self-funded a very robust education and training program for workplace safety. And we introduced to the Manitoba market what is referred to as core certification, certificate of recognition. That is recognized by government. It was industry that approached the provincial government and asked, and the government agreed, that certification under core be a condition of contract. So any publicly tendered project requires a contractor to demonstrate that it is core certified. That program, self-funded by industry, is the model upon which Safe Work Manitoba was built. To suggest that employers do not care, do not invest in safety, or do not invest in the education and training of their workforce is patently inaccurate. And the WCB can testify to the fact that third-party audits of the core program, of the industry-based safety programs, have consistently demonstrated a reduction in frequency, duration, and severity of claims. Those are the results of decades and millions of dollars of investment focused on the safety of our workforce.
Mr. Wiebe.
Well, thank you very, very much, Mr. Lawrence, for coming out. It's great to see you here in committee, and great to have your participation and your voice. You know, one of the things that strikes me about some of the things that you put on the record today is your commitment, as you said, to safety, to making sure that workers have access to training. I think it sounds like we're all kind of on the same page with regards to that kind of stuff. So I appreciate that you as an industry group have promoted that and continue to push for that. I think that's an important part of this conversation. The question I had for you is with regards to you know, labor peace, to guarantee against strikes and against lockouts. How do you feel about that component of PLAs, giving that certainty, especially when we're talking about big projects that government is undertaking, giving that certainty to have the project done well, and done on time and on budget?
Mr. Larenc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the question. One of the unique things about the Manitoba market is that we have a LMRC, Labor Relations Management Committee, which has representation from organized labor, a representation from employers, and it's chaired by Michael Warrior. And many of the issues which would typically result in strike action or labor relations hostility is handled through the LMRC. Jurisdictions to the east and west of this province marvel at the fact and lament the fact that they don't have comparable institutions, comparable bodies through which we can vet the development of labor relations legislation. The legacy of the LMRC is the fact that we have developed legislation that has the buy-in from both employer and employee communities, which results in labor peace. It has less to do with PLAs and far more to do with the fact that as Manitobans, we work together to common objectives. One of them is labor peace.
Thank you for your presentation. We will now move on to the next presenter. I will now call on Mr. Jeff Skinner of IBEW 2085 and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. I've been informed Mr. Jeff Skinner is not here right now, so we'll move him to the bottom of the list. I will now call on Mr. Kyle Kalsix of Local 254 Plumbers and Pipe Fitters and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on.
Good evening.
Mr. Kalsix, please proceed with your presentation.
Good evening, and I really appreciate your pronunciation of my last name. I've heard it called many things. So I am Mr. Kyle Kalsix. I'm business manager of Local 254, and I oppose this bill, and I'm here to give you my perspective as well as my perspective of my members. My local has approximately 1,300 members, including plumbers, steam fitters, refrigeration members, sprinkler fitters, welders. And as I said, I want to present my view, a few issues that pertain to this bill. The committee members are tasked with making a decision that will have a profound impact on the future of Manitoba. Projects our members have worked on are such as that's been talked about earlier, the floodway, Wascoatum, Kiosk. Projects of this nature provide opportunity for training and apprenticeships, safe job sites that follow safety protocols that our contractors ensure and our members follow. Recruitment of workers local to the area, particularly Northern and Indigenous. This is especially important for Manitobas and minority groups that depend on PLAs to break the cycle of unemployment. Current projects such as Kiosk have given many local Indigenous people the opportunity to start apprenticeships, which broadens our Manitoban workforce. At the end of the day, we should all want these opportunities for Manitobans. Having wages earned to support our local economy. Local workers while on these projects will be furthering the skills in their trades for our local workforce for future projects. Without PLAs, many local jobs for Manitobans would not exist. The PLAs help ensure Manitobans won't lose out on jobs that are right in their backyards. As spoken about earlier, PLAs have been around for 55 years and were created by the PC government. PLAs have time and again ensured the best quality infrastructure projects for Manitobans while saving taxpayer dollars. Manitoba projects should benefit Manitobans. PLAs ensure that the investments made in Manitoba benefit Manitobans first and foremost. The best way to protect the Manitoba workers on the projects is to stop Bill 13. Bill 13 will ban PLAs altogether, taking away opportunities from future generations. Without PLAs, there'll be no guarantee for local jobs and the construction project quality and safety, as spoken about earlier, is a concern. PLAs guarantee the same standards of safety and oversight for everybody working on the construction site. Without it, workers are left vulnerable to accidents and serious injuries, and projects are left open to delays, resentment, mistrust, and high worker turnover. By building infrastructure through PLAs, quality is added to the equation. It's imperative that when you're using taxpayer dollars for projects, no corners are cut. Long-term quality is the most important thing to consider when building Manitoba infrastructure, and we want these things. We want building that's going to last. In conclusion, in the case of Bill 13, we know that the government wants to achieve value for money. We applaud this, but oppose the method, the way they choose to approach it in. This bill will only cost Manitobans in the long run. We ask that you consider the evidence, and if you're considering this bill, to reconsider an answer to workers who will be directly impacted. Bill 13 will have irreversibly negative implications for our local jobs, our project quality and safety of construction sites. Manitoba workers and communities deserve better. Our members play an imperative role to Manitoba's infrastructure for the future. For good quality for our workers and our communities, please vote against this bill. I thank everybody for your time, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? Honourable Minister.
Mr. Kelsis, I hope I got that right. Seeing as the chair got it right, why shouldn't I? First of all, thank you for being here. Appreciate that you logged on and gave your presentation. I do want to, however, point out to you that, for instance, safety requirements, standards, worker training, recruitment targets, and wages are all covered off by legislation or by the contract themselves. Like, how would not having or allowing non-union shops to bid and not be forced to unionize, how would that change anything in the contract when the safety requirements are still part of the contract, as our standards, workers' wages are covered off by prevailing legislation, so on and so forth? I guess there seems to be a misconception or a disconnect, because Bill 13 does not prevent any of these things. They're part of the contract. So I don't understand how this ends up being such I'm choosing your words carefully the way you worded it. You worded it better than I did, but it actually doesn't impact that. The only thing is it allows union and non-union shops to bid on these contracts and to be allowed to do so without any impediment that non-union shops have to be forced unionized. So again, struggling with for instance, the safety requirements, which are part of the contract anyway. Could you help us out there?
Mr. Kelsick.
Sure, thank you. First of all, the comment, the PLAs that we're referring to mandate a certain number of apprentices, so more apprentices than normal that are asked for, as well as Indigenous persons to be hired. There's numbers that were indicated for the project. As far as safety, I guess it's open to perspective. However, we know the policies that are in place by unionized contractors. We know the processes that they go through before they start their day, how they go over their tasks. And so therefore, we know that when a worker's going to work, they've went over the skill task and they're ready for work safely.
Mr. Wiebe.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Mr. Kelsick, for your participation here tonight. I really appreciate your on-the-ground knowledge of how these PLAs impact workers in Manitoba. I think that's what we're really looking to get from these committee hearings. I think the minister, thinks that he knows, has all the answers, but when we hear from people on the ground, I think that really impacts our perception and helps us understand. I really appreciate you talking more about those so-called recruitment targets and how giving labor a seat at the table right from the get-go can be really beneficial. So, I don't think I have a question so much as just a comment to say thank you very much for your time here tonight. And I do appreciate your perspective, because I think that's what all of us as committee members could really benefit from.
Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Mr. Gerard.
Yeah, my question, again, has to do with the safety issue. I've seen circumstances and dealt with families who've lost loved ones through accidents. And it seems to me that the problem was not just what was legislated, but what the practice was at the site. And I wonder if you would comment.
Mr. Kalsix.
Yes, and that's more what I was referring to when I responded earlier, the process that's in place. So legislation is one thing, but what is actually practice? So at the end of the day, PLA, or when we talk about job starts, for example, using a job start. So before you go and do that task, you go over any concerns of the area, if you're not supposed to go into certain areas, as well as, like you say, a step-by-step instruction on how you do your task. And like you say, we know this is what our processes are, and that's why we talk about safety.
Mr. Gerard?
I just wanted to say thank you.
Any other comments, Mr. Kalsix?
Thank you, I'm good.
Thank you for your presentation. I will now call on Mr. Marc Lafont, Operating Engineers Local 987, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Lafont, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for providing me with an opportunity to speak to committee on this bill. My name is Marc Lafont, Business Manager of the Operating Engineers Local 987. We are a trade union with approximately 1,400 members in the province of Manitoba. Members in our local union are represented by crane operators, mechanics, pipeliners, heavy equipment operators, and stationary engineers. Proponents of project labor agreements, such as ourselves, argue that agreements have several advantages. Advantages such as PLAs provide uniform wages, benefits, overtime pay, hours, working conditions, and working rules. PLAs provide contractors with reliable and uninterrupted supply of qualified workers at a predictable cost. And Mr. Sandhu referred to one project in the province currently underway, and the lowest bidder actually has or had Kijiji ads looking for employees at that same site. PLAs ensure no labor strife to provide prohibiting strikes and lockouts, and include binding procedures to resolve labor disputes. PLAs allow a larger percentage of construction wages to stay in local community. For the overall economy of Manitoba, PLAs have a net positive effect on local communities and provide a stable middle-class income. Workers tend to be locally recruited, often as a condition of the PLA. Additional benefits are such as apprenticeship training programs mandated by PLAs. They are often a complement to the local community. These skills are portable and can be used to other projects and construction sites throughout the country and throughout this province. We know that PLAs provide a positive impact on creating great pathways for women, Indigenous people, minorities, veterans, and other underrepresented population of Manitoba. However, developing quality workers in the construction trades historically has been hard to identify. PLAs have been in place around the country since the 1930s. Many large projects include the Hoover Dam in Nevada, Cape Canaveral in Florida, the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline, Confederation Bridge, Horizon Oil Sands in Alberta, just to name a couple. Opponents, on the other hand, argue that PLAs are unfair, anti-competitive, and unnecessary. They will say that they are unfair because they typically favor unionized labor. Even though that PLAs allow for non-union labor participation, and there is many cases in the province. Passing this law that disallows a PLA on publicly funded projects is unnecessary and solely based on ideology. There is currently no law that I'm aware of that absolutely requires a PLA to be put into place in the province. Therefore, I ask myself, why is it necessary to create one to disallow it? Don't we owe it to Manitobans to use PLAs on a case-by-case basis if the project warrants it? Why throw the baby out with the bathwater? Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lafond, and great to see you again. It's been a while since we've had a chance to sit down and have a conversation, and great to see you here this evening. I'd like to point out that Bill 13 does not prevent PLAs. It doesn't mean that a contractor can't win the contract and put in a PLA. However, it does not mean that you have to be a unionized company to win and have to pay union dues and be unionized. So anyway, we are going to disagree on those points, and that's fine. Great to see you out anyway. Have a great evening. I'm sure you're going to have something to add to this.
Mr. Lafond.
I don't have anything to add.
Mr. Wiebe.
Thank you very much. And we will have more to say about that, I'm sure, as the evening goes on. But thank you very much for coming, Mr. Lafond, and for joining us here virtually in this committee. Again, I think your experience and the perspective that you bring from your members is helpful for us. Specifically, I wanted to ask you just about allowing for workers, this idea of, and we've heard it a few times from a few different presenters, local hires versus non-local hires, and the importance of the PLA in ensuring that we have that Manitoba workers being at the head of the line when it comes to working on these important projects. Can you just talk a little bit more about how the PLAs can impact that and help protect those local hires?
Mr. Lafond.
Yes, thank you for the question. In most instances, the PLA will have provisions in there for sort of like a pecking order as to who is first to be hired and who is first to be laid off. And normally it's local community members first, then it's local Manitobans, and then it's unionized employees, then it's Canadians at large as sort of the last resort. So certainly PLAs, from my vantage point at least, does help community members directly because the projects are being done in their local area. So they should have actually the repatriation of all those dollars coming back to those communities. So people are buying vehicles, bread, milk, so on and so forth.
Mr. Wiebe.
Did you recognize me? Oh, okay. Well, I don't have another question, but I will just take this opportunity to thank you once again for participating. I think we've heard, a consistent message here this evening, and the importance of safety, of training, of employing Manitobans and making sure that these projects are getting done in a predictable way. I think you've hit all those points, so thanks so much for joining us and giving us those facts.
We can still open the floor for any more questions.
Yes, I have an additional question.
Okay, Mr. Gerard, go ahead.
Yeah, there's been a lot of emphasis put on low bidding and low bids and how this gives you cheaper work. But we've seen many examples recently where companies which got the low bid actually ended up with going way, way over. The Winnipeg International Airport, the Bombers Stadium, the visitation shelters for personal care homes. So, I mean, even though a company may get, put forward a low bid, it doesn't necessarily mean you end up with a low price. Is that right? Why is this?
Mr. Lafond?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And often in the construction, and I don't profess to be a general contractor or know the ins and outs of their industry, but certainly from my perspective, sometimes you attract the winning bid by a low bid, and then you have change orders, and you do certain things in order to make more money at the end of the day. And I don't know necessarily if that was the case in some of those projects, but certainly the lowest bidder isn't necessarily the best scenario for, I think, major projects in the province. And with regard to WC, with safety too, I would be remiss if I didn't point out a WCB study that was commissioned by Ontario a few years ago, and they pointed out that large unionized workplaces are 31% safer.
Thank you for your presentation. The time for questions is over for this presenter. I will now call on R.T. Sharma, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on.
Hi, sorry,
Ms. Sharma, please proceed with your presentation.
Hi, I write this presentation requesting the Legislative Assembly to emphasize the importance of project labor agreements and why we need them. I, Arti Sharma, a woman of color and a proud Manitoban, oppose the proposed Bill 13. I personally have been involved under a recent project labor agreement. I can assure you that by banning this decades-long tradition of using project labor agreements, the government is taking away not only good jobs for Manitobans, but also taking away the key aspect of training and safety that is crucial in the building of these large public infrastructure projects. I humbly request that the government please keep the best interests of Manitobans in mind. Withdraw Bill 13. Under a PLA, common wages and working conditions are established for large groups of contractors and a diverse transient workforce. By requiring all contractors to pay fair wages under one collective agreement, contractors are selected for productivity and quality, not just price. As demonstrated, PLAs consistently deliver high quality roads, hospitals, and other infrastructure. Work environments on these projects are complex, and dozens of employers and hundreds to thousands of workers may come in and out over a long period of time. Such as the Manitoba Hydro Dam. But in these complex environments, the PLA provides a sense of stability through labor standards, wages, and HR practices. PLAs also guarantee no strikes or lockouts. To be quite clear, there is a contract between the workers, contractors, and project owners that can reduce the unknown risks. All parties are kept accountable under the PLA. PLAs provide skilled workers who are trained and not only in their respective trade, but they are trained as well as well-versed in safety practices. Safety standards mandated by PLAs are transparent and accountable, with common understandings over what safety means being shared across a project. As shown in reports written by Build Force Canada and Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, to name a few, there is going to be a shortage in skilled worker labor. These PLAs can ensure that there's a proper training and skill development that will increase the number of skilled workers. We need to promote these practices, but for contractors to be kept accountable, we need these PLAs. PLAs also allow training opportunities for underrepresented groups, such as youth, Indigenous, women, newcomer Canadians, veterans, etc. Such training and apprenticeship initiatives through these PLAs are key to supporting meaningful work for underrepresented populations and to help young people build their futures right here at home. That's why governments of all political stripes have relied on PLAs. I have heard of things such as forced unionization. It is not hidden that the current provincial government sees PLAs as forced unionization. However, this is incorrect. The bidding process is open to any company. Under the PLA, they are kept accountable in ensuring fair wages are paid and proper training and safety procedures are adhered to. I don't see what is wrong in that. I respect that the current government is looking to reduce costs and save money, but at the expense of taking away work from Manitobans, taking taxpayer dollars to pay for out-of-province or out-of-country workers. What guarantee is there that these contractors will provide a well-trained workforce? If these workers get injured in Manitoba, who is liable? What initiatives will the province impose on these contractors? How will these contractors be held accountable? What guarantee is there of quality work? Does the government want our taxpayer dollars to stimulate other economies outside of Manitoba? There are so many unanswered questions. In short, project labor agreements have benefited the working families, our economy, but also all Manitobans who benefit from these important infrastructures that our Manitobans have built. There's a sense of pride in that, built by Manitobans for Manitobans. Again, let's withdraw Bill 13. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Sharma, and I have been in these committee rooms for over 20-some years, about 22, and I have never seen a presentation being given from inside of a car. So this is a first for a committee, and thank you for having broken another barrier. We appreciate it, and it shows you how we can use technology to our advantage. Ms. Sharma, there seems to be a lot of misconception. Safety requirements, standards, workers' wages are all covered off by either the contract or by legislation. Worker training is also in the contract. Recruitment targets are also part of the contract. So, Ms. Sharma, my question to you is, if safety requirements, standards, workers' wages, worker training, recruitment targets, all the rest of that is part of the contract, the only thing that PLAs give is that you must have a forced unionization on a shop. We believe this is about freedom, that if you don't want to be part of a union, you have a business where the workers don't want to be part of a union, they should be allowed to bid and get the contract to build something and not be forced to unionize. All the other elements remain. I don't understand where the rub is.
Ms. Sharma.
Sorry, I'm not clear on your question. Are you saying that this is forced unionization? Is that what you're asking me? I'm not clear.
The Honourable Minister.
Well, if you are the successful bidder on a PLA, you must unionize. Yes, and we read that. We read that to committee. It's part of the PLA agreement. It's in black and white, and I know there's a misconception and misunderstanding, or maybe it's just twisted to be something else. But yes, it's a forced unionization under PLA. Also, what we're saying with this legislation is that you can be a union shop, you can be a non-union shop. It shouldn't be the premise by which you get the tender, and you shouldn't be forced to unionize. All the other elements remain in regards to safety standards, wages, and so on and so forth. I don't know if you're aware of it, but we want to make sure that we are all real here at committee. And thank you for joining us from your vehicle. Great to see you.
Ms. Sharma.
Thank you. So just in regards to the previous presenter, Mark Lafond had touched on a study in regards to safety. And you know what, I should have sent this out, but I didn't. So the Ontario Construction Secretariat did a study where it was proven and shown that unionized work sites are 31% safer than non-unionized. So I wouldn't want to, really want to emphasize and drive that point home in regards to safety and training. And so in regards to the forced unionization, I mean, again, a non-unionized contractor or unionized contractor, non-unionized contractor, either or can bid. But again, you do get more quality workers from a unionized, from a union, in my personal opinion. That's, again, my personal opinion. But yeah, thank you.
Mr. Wiebe.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Sharma, and I think your opinion, is right. And I think, as you said, there's certainly a lot of studies that shows that unionized shops have a lot of benefit, and that's the reason why a lot of unionized labor is used to perform these kind of big operations. I think it's very easy to be confused because the minister continues to try to make it confusing. But I mean, his predecessor said very clearly quote, "There's no forced unionization on a project labor agreement. In a project labor agreement, there's no compulsion to join the union." And of course, we know that. That's what we've heard over and over again tonight, that there is choice still with the project labor agreement. It just ensures that everybody's on the same level playing field. And I take your point about safety and training, because I think that's an important part of this conversation, that we do need to look to our union friends who are trying to promote workplace safety, trying to promote the workers' health. And I think that's a big part of this conversation. And, again, I mean, if we're all on the same page, why do we have this legislation that seems to just go directly after unions and does nothing to actually improve either these projects or the safety and health of workers?
Ms. Sharma.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Thank you.
The Honourable
I have
Minister.
Are we out of time then?
No, you got the time. Yep.
Okay. Just for
The Honourable Minister.
Okay, Ms. Sharma, the contract reads, the project labor agreement reads, and I'll read from you, it's 12.2.1. I'll read you 12.2.2 as well. So I'll read 12.2.2. The contractor shall, at the time of hire, advise all employees who are not members of the appropriate union that they are required to secure such membership within 30 calendar days of being hired. It is right in the project labor agreement. If you are a non-union shop, you must unionize. Your members must become part of a union membership.
Thank you for your presentation. The time for questions is over for the presenter. I will now call on Mr. Ed Miller, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Ed Miller, I'm aware is not here, so we'll drop him to the bottom of the list. So we'll proceed with Kylie Parker, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on.
Hello.
Mr. Parker, please proceed with your presentation.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Kylie Parker. I'd like to give you a little bit of information on who I am. I was born and raised in Portage Prairie, Manitoba. I would join the Canadian Armed Forces when I was 18 years old. I was a Leopard battle tank driver, and I served 7.5-month tour of duty in Afghanistan. When I left the military, I headed to Fort McMurray, and I started my career in construction. I became a surface blaster. So I use explosives to move rock and earth out of the way in pits and quarries and on construction projects. I'm a member of LIUNA Local 1258 currently. Kiosk was the first project that I worked on that fell under a project labor agreement. I was very thankful that it was, and I'm here to tell you why. Project labor agreements form a solid foundation to build your project on. There are requirements that ensure the contractor hires locally first. That means that Manitobans get first opportunity to work on our projects in our province, and the contractor can't bring in a bunch of cheap out-of-province labor, which is a reality on these large projects. You get one superintendent from out of province, and the next thing you know, his entire crew is from the same province. We've seen this before, and it happens on all of these large-scale projects. So the PLAs make sure that Manitobans are put to work first when we are building our infrastructure, and I think most Manitobans would agree that this is a good thing. Project labor agreements also promote a safer workplace, and I think I'm going to touch on what we're talking about here because I spent over 4 years at Kiosk as a craft worker on the ground. Construction workers face challenging working conditions every day, and we're always pressured to get more done. Now, construction site safety has come a long way over the years, and we're not talking about times of old. But you would be naive to think that construction workers today don't face threats and intimidation on the job site to get more done. Regardless of what Manitoba Hydro has to say, this happened almost daily on the Manitoba Kiosk project. I witnessed it. But because we were under a project labor agreement at Kiosk, we had someone to go to. We had representation to go for help and advice. And I knew as a worker that I wasn't going to be fired, and none of my coworkers were going to be fired for demanding a safe place to work. That was a guarantee at Kiosk because of the representation that we had. Another important piece of the PLA is the requirement of contractors and construction companies must hire skilled, qualified tradespeople to do the work so that we build it right the first time. And of course, you don't get skilled labor if you don't pay a fair wage. Project labor agreements provide stable and justified wage rates based on trade and skill. Again, I think the majority of Manitobans would agree that tradespeople and construction workers deserve a fair wage for the often dangerous and hard work that they do every day. PLAs ensure Manitobans get a fair wage. No strikes, no lockouts, pretty self-explanatory. This keeps the project moving forward at all times. Many PLAs have requirements for training new workers and providing opportunities for workers to gain new skills or even a new trade. I personally know people who started off working on the Kiosk project as a general laborer and left as carpenters or iron workers on their way to being journeymen in those trades. We have motivated Manitobans who are improving their career opportunities while they're at work. Again, this is benefiting Manitobans and the communities that they come from. So PLAs ensure the following on our capital projects. Manitobans have the first opportunity to work on and build our infrastructure. All workers can perform their jobs safely without threats and intimidation. Contractors must hire skilled workers to complete the job and pay them a fair wage. They provide skills and training to Manitobans, making them more employable and improving their livelihoods. And there's no strikes or lockouts. Everything I have mentioned benefits the average Manitoban and the communities that they come from. Without community benefit agreements or project labor agreements, how do we ensure that the future projects that we build provide the same benefits and opportunities for Manitobans? We can't. Project labor agreements have proved time and time again that when you value your workers and you value the communities that they come from, that we can build much greater things on a construction site than just dams and buildings. And all in all, to wrap up, is the average Manitoban going to receive anything from this bill? Is it going to make their lives better? I don't think so. Will tradespeople and construction workers benefit? No. So that leaves me wondering, who does benefit? Well, it seems that the merit group of contractors must have much to benefit from this bill. They challenged our PLAs in 2012 in this province, and they failed. They challenged British Columbia's project labor agreements, or what they refer to now as community benefit agreements, and they failed. So what happens when you keep losing? Well, you must change the rules, of course. Merit is clearly lobbying this Conservative government to advance their agenda of catering to contractors and company owners first, rather than giving the workers and the communities that they come from. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? The Honourable Minister.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Parker, for being here this evening, and I want to just take a moment to thank you for your service to our country, particularly active service. Thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. I guess you could say this is what you fought for, is the freedom for the democracy. This is what it's all about, to be able to come and speak to legislation. And this is the crux of our democracy, and thank you for going and helping to defend our country. I also want to thank you for working on Kiosk. I was the minister at one point in time of Manitoba Hydro, and I had a tour up there. It's a magnificent project, and thanks for your contributions up there. I just want to say, Mr. Parker, you and I will disagree. I think you have some misconceptions about Bill 13. Safety requirements, standards, workers' wages, worker training, recruitment targets, and even skilled trades for the task are all covered off by contract and can be, for instance, when it comes to worker training, that can be adjusted up and down depending on where the project is and what the outcome is supposed to be, and that is done with all contracts. The project labor agreements don't necessarily mean that is the case. It's a contract. So it's done by contract, and we've also heard that the private companies also have what's called the core certification, which is government approved. It's done with WCB. But I guess we can agree to disagree. This doesn't change anything other than we believe that choice and freedom of choice is important. We believe that, and certainly I do fundamentally. I think freedom is very important, and freedom of choice is. So that you have to choose, if you choose to be part of a non-union shop, you should still be able to bid on a job. You should be able to get the job if you're the best bid, and you should be able to do the work. And I guess that's where I come from. Thank you very much for presenting. Look forward to your comments, and again, thank you for your service to this country.
Mr. Parker.
Thank you very much, sir. I have nothing else further to say.
Mr. Wiebe.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Parker, for your service and for the work that you do now. It sounds incredibly dangerous. It also sounds incredibly important. And so I want to thank you for being one of the people who goes out there, puts your life at risk every single day to do the job that you want to do and that we need you to do. And we want to make sure that you get home at the end of the day to see your family. And then that's, I think, what we're talking about here this evening. I think you have a perfect perspective as being somebody who's actually been on the ground, actually done the work. And so I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit more. You mentioned it a bit, but I mean, it sounds like safety has got to be like the #1 issue that's top of mind for you at all times. The pressures of a big project like this, of the government's trying to save a few bucks, they're hiring the cheapest contractor they can. There's a lot of pressure to get the work done. Like, what does that do to somebody who's on the ground doing dangerous work like you are? And what kind of pressures would you feel if you weren't protected by something like a PLA?
Mr. Parker.
Well, at the beginning of Kiosk, for anyone that's familiar with it, there was a large amount of blasting that had to be done, much more than the previous projects with Squatum and a few others. We carved out the powerhouse intake and the spillway. And we were on a very tight time frame because the contractor, BBE, underbid big time, and they weren't going to be making any money on their drilling and blasting. So literally every day, we were pressured to do more and more and more work around the drills, work in dust, no breaks, everything like that. And that happened every day on a Manitoba Hydro project. That's the reality of a construction site. And when the superintendent is standing there telling you that the work's got to get done today, and you have a valid reason as to why you can't do this because of a safety reason, you're told, well, we're going to find someone that will. We'll find someone that'll do it, and they will, because guys will. And that's how they threaten you and intimidate you into working unsafely, is they'll just hold your job against you. That's what happens on construction sites. Thank you.
I have a question.
Mr. Gerard?
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of doing it right the first time. Can you give us examples of where that came up and why that's so critical?
Mr. Parker, you may answer the question. We're running short of time, so go ahead, Mr. Parker.
Thank you. For myself, I think that's referring to, under the current project labor agreements, when we bring workers up, majority of them are coming out of union halls. The carpenters are coming out of the carpenter's hall. The iron workers are coming out of the iron workers hall. They're qualified workers that are skilled, and they have the certification to do the job. They're not people that are being hired to be a carpenter, an iron worker, a laborer, a concrete person, and a jack of all trades on the job site for 20 bucks an hour. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about hiring the right person for the right job. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
The time for questions is over for this presenter. I will now call on Joshua Lapointe, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Lapointe is not here at the moment, so we'll drop him to the bottom of the list. So I'll now call upon Jeff Skinner of IBEW 2085 and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on.
Hi, everyone. How's it going?
Mr. Skinner, please proceed with your presentation.
Yes. Thank you very much. I just want to apologize. I've been having internet issues all night. So, yes, so I'm just speaking obviously on PLAs. The majority of unions have training centers, which means workers are safety ready, and the majority are safety trained, ready to go on the job. We have pre-employment programs for new apprentices to ensure that before they go onto job sites that they have a good base before heading onto the job, which obviously keeps them safer and give us a better foundation all the way up until we have our obviously journeyman electricians, because I'm part of the IBW, but and all the other, for the most part, the building trades, a lot of them have training centers as well. Building solid foundations are just going to be building more solid certified tradespeople to perform these projects. The PLAs ensure that the bidders that win the contracts win based on the ability to manage the job and efficiencies, not based on trying to cut corners and essentially undercut, whether it's wages or whatever, or trying to find some loophole in trying to win these projects. Obviously, PLAs ensure unemployed Manitobans get first crack at the job, which also includes where we and unions are huge supporters of, if we're building in certain communities, that we involve the community members in the jobs and give them training opportunities, which they can take back to their communities even after the projects are done. Having unions involved, I've worked both union and non-union in my career. I've seen the differences between the management styles. And I can tell you this, that unions are heavily involved in solving problems on the jobs when they're still small, so they don't fester into big problems. I've been on non-union sites where, they just sweep things under the rug and issues become bigger issues. It drags morale down, productivity goes down, and ultimately the timeline gets way thrown out. And again, that's my experience. And ultimately, having union shops, managing the jobs, and helping progress and harmony of the jobs just creates way more value for the dollar for Manitoba infrastructure building and for Manitobans to enjoy for many years. Honestly, I could tell you this, that in Manitoba, the majority of the big jobs that are built are done by union shops, by union members, and where jobs go awry are with not having the proper well-trained general foremans, and with the union shops, we've done these big jobs. We know how to do it. We're well-trained, and we train everybody underneath us. It's about lifting each other up and ensuring that we're all successful in the job. In my experience in the non-union with non-union contractors is that's not the case. It's everybody for themselves. Unions do keep the members accountable, not only to the contractor, but the client. And in this case is, the citizens of Manitoba. We keep everybody accountable. It's not just, there's a perception that unions hammer, the contractors and we bring people down. That is not the case. That is a big misperception. We're about keeping everybody accountable, keeping a symbiotic relationship so we can ensure that progress and harmony continues through the duration of the job and to completion. Sorry. Another thing is with the PLAs, you talk about being forced unionization and stuff, but the open shops that are successful in winning parts of a PLA, they abide by the contract for the duration of the contract. If they have other projects somewhere else, they can still do that running as an open shop. And as soon as the job is done, workers or the contractor could go back to work as usual. And you know what? I bet you over the course of the relationship with the unions and the clients with these PLAs, a lot of them are going to see the benefits of having a union involved in ensuring that everybody stays accountable for helping with training and supporting the contractor throughout the course of the project. That's essentially it.
Thank you for the presentation. Do members of the committee have questions for the presenter? The Honourable Minister.
Yeah, I thank you very much, Mr. Skinner, for being here. And it looks like you're Skyping in from your garage, is what it looks like.
I am.
And you know, I would like to say that, again, I've been at this committee, and this is actually the first time we've ever had somebody speak to committee from their garage. So there's a first for you, Mr. Skinner. I just have a quick comment I'd like to make. There seems to be some misinformation being put on the record that actually the for instance, the Burntwood-Nelson Agreement, amongst others, clearly states the contractor shall, at the time of hire, advise all employees who are not members of the appropriate union that they are required to secure such membership within 30 calendar days of being hired, and that's section 12.2.2. I guess you would agree with that, that actually if a non or an open shop bids and wins, that they must unionize. Is that correct?
So my answer to that is the member or the worker will unionize, but just for the duration of that PLA. So the contractor is not a union shop, but for the duration of that project, they're a union shop. All their other projects in Manitoba or outer province will not be under a union contract. So they would be essentially double-breasting is what that would be for the duration of that project.
Mr. Wiebe?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much, Mr. Skinner. Once again, it's pretty amazing that somebody joining us from Zoom obviously knows the situation on the ground, has a whole ton of knowledge. And it seems like you know more than the minister, and so we've tried to educate the minister all evening here. His predecessor, in fact, tried to educate him about exactly how PLAs work, but he seems to be off, just stuck on his own speaking notes and can't seem to listen to the actual people who are coming to present this evening. So I just wanted to say, I thought your perspective, you know, having experienced both as in a unionized setting and a non-unionized setting was important for this discussion. It sounds like you've got a pretty good sense of how both those environments can work, and it sounds like you're one of the people that wants to just get to work, have your members get to work, and get these important projects in Manitoba built. So again, I mean, I think you're informing all of us. I'm certainly listening. I think maybe members on the other side of the table aren't paying as close attention, but maybe by the end of the evening we'll have the minister all briefed up on exactly how project labor agreements are a good thing for Manitobans. Thanks for presenting tonight.
Mr. Skinner.
You're welcome. I appreciate you saying that. I have been on both sides, and I can honestly say that if you talk to an open shop worker as of right now and say, hey, you know what? You want to join the IBW for this project, we'll give you a 30% increase in pay, including benefits and pension. And you know what? We'll throw on the top of the 13% completion bonus. I think that's a pretty good investment. And I don't think too many people are non-union or open shop workers would be complaining about that. So in my experience, I've never heard one person complain in my whole life about joining a union for a 30% increase. So thank you very much.
Mr. Gerard.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I think what you were trying to say was that safety is not just about setting standards, it's actually about building teams who can work well together and look after each other. Is that correct?
Mr. Skinner.
That's absolutely correct. And it starts with supervision and having well-experienced supervision who know how systems work, how to run these big projects, these big crews, and filtering all the way from the top, all the way to the first level apprentice on the job, all from different walks of life, understanding that everybody has different needs. Safety is a team, looking out for each other and working together, all trades in a symbiotic way. And, it just comes from a community coming together to do the project. And that's what unions are all about. It's teamwork and doing the best we can for Manitoba is what it's all about.
Mr. Gerard.
Yeah, no, that was my question. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your presentation. I will now call on Ed Miller, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. Mr. Miller will be dropped from the list since he is not here. So we'll now move on and call on Mr. Joshua Lapointe, private citizen, and ask the moderator to invite them into the meeting. Please unmute yourself and turn your video on. So Mr. Lapointe is not here as well, so we are done with presentations. That concludes the list of presenters I have before me. In what order does the committee wish to proceed with the clause-by-clause consideration of these bills? Honorable Minister.
In the order as printed on the agenda.
Does the committee agree to proceed clause by clause of the bill? Agreed. 13. Does the minister responsible for Bill 13 have an opening statement? No, Mr. Chair. We thank the minister. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement? Mr. Wiebe.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to begin by thanking all the presenters that joined us here this evening. I did learn a lot. And, I always appreciate coming to committee and, getting outside of the bubble of Broadway, getting outside of this building. And I think all of us have something to learn. I think there's a lot to learn when we listen to people who are doing the actual work. And especially in a department like infrastructure, where we ask so much of folks to build these great infrastructure projects that all of us Manitobans prioritize, and and we ask them to help us to build these, and we ask that they sometimes put their lives at risk to make it happen. And to hear them firsthand, I think was an important part of the process. As we know, Bill 13 concerns tenders issued by government and other public sector bodies for construction projects. Previous governments of all stripes have used project labor agreements on large capital projects, for example, requiring employers to either employ unionized employees or contribute the equivalent union dues for non-unionized employees. Bill 13, contrary to what the minister says, explicitly bans project labor agreements. This government, we know, is obsessed with introducing these kind of anti-labor and anti-union legislation. Banning PLAs on public infrastructure projects is extremely short-sighted and will lead to lower wages, more dangerous working conditions, and less job opportunities for Manitobans, especially for Indigenous Manitobans. PLAs mandate that non-union contractors must invest their fair share in the training and development of Manitoba's workforce, instead of offloading these costs onto unions and the government. Without PLAs, it's a race to the bottom, where some contractors offload the costs of a well-trained, highly skilled workforce onto others. And that's not what any of us want. PLAs ensure that everyone pays their fair share. In calling for opening tendering, this government is creating the impression non-union firms have previously been prevented from bidding on these Manitoba projects. And of course, this has never been the case. It's troubling that this government suggests that PLAs violate workers' rights and quote, force unionization. This suggestion is absolutely absurd. PLAs have never required that bidders or workers be from a union, and non-union contractors are never required to sign union agreements. Former Premier Duff Roblin changed the tendering equation from considering costs only to cost plus quality. He did this to prevent contractors from bringing poorly trained and unqualified labor to critical infrastructure projects. He recognized lowest price did not always mean lowest overall cost or best value. This current government only cares about the bottom line, not the opportunities or safety of Manitobans. This bill is just as unpopular today as it was when this government first introduced it in 2018, and is another example of the government pushing through poor legislation while continuing to refuse to listen to Manitobans. Construction workers provide essential services to our province that allow us to have safe roads and buildings, help us create productive and prosperous province for all. The construction industry accounts for approximately 8% of Manitoba employment and a significant contributor to the economic stability of Manitoba. However, the Pallister government is driving the construction industry into the ground. They've cut hundreds of millions in annual infrastructure spending, and they continue to underspend what they do budget by hundreds of millions every year since taking office. Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office, for example, found that Manitoba's per capita spending on capital projects has dropped to the third lowest in the country, only ahead of Nova Scotia and PEI. Manitobans deserve good jobs, fair wages, and safe working conditions. I'd like to thank all the presenters for making their valuable input on Bill 13, and I hope that the minister might actually start to listen to these hardworking Manitobans, listen to their suggestions and their concerns, and do what's right for the Manitoba construction industry. And I'll just say, you know, at no time did I hear the minister dispute anything that when we were talking about safety and about training and about making sure that Manitobans are put to work. So why doesn't he work with our union partners? Why doesn't he work with labor and help make sure they have a seat at the table? You know, PLAs have been put in place to protect Manitobans from governments just like this. And without a PLA in place, governments that are anti-union, anti-worker will run roughshod over those workers who are doing important, critical work in Manitoba. We can't let this bill pass. We will continue to fight it every step of the way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We thank the member. Now, it is my understanding the minister responsible would like to make a statement for Bill 13. The member on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I heard the minister very clearly say no, he did not have an opening statement. I'd be happy if the minister would like to ask for leave of the committee. I think that's within the rules of the committee if he would ask for leave. But certainly he has already given up his opportunity to make a statement, and I think that that should stand as per what we can certainly read in Hansard.
Mr. Schuler on the same point of order.
Point of order. We didn't shut down the member. We didn't shut down presenters. I don't think we want to shut down anybody. I think any member of this committee is allowed to speak. And you know what? We just heard all kinds of presentations, one from an individual who fought for freedoms, and there goes the NDP shutting people down again. That's their idea of democracy and freedom. Shut everybody down, don't let them speak. Typical NDP.
From my understanding, it is correct that we will require leave to revert back if the minister wishes to make an opening statement. Will the committee grant leave for the minister to make a statement on Bill 13? What does the committee wish? Honourable Minister, on a point of order.
Yeah, again, this is typical NDP. They want to shut everybody down, and that's fine. Let them shut this down. And the member for our Concordia laughs like he's still part of the frat house that he and his leader like to run in the question period. And Mr. Chair, That's fine. Leave was denied for members of this committee to speak, and we will pick this up at third reading.
On the same point of order, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Weeb, on the same point of order.
Well, it's clearly not a point of order, and members of the committee, members who are following along on the live feed will have clearly heard the minister inexplicably, in my mind, refuse to make an opening statement on a piece of legislation that he's been trying to jam through for 3 years, that he knows that Manitobans across this province stand against, that we've heard nothing but a criticism to all evening.
Order. And that is not a point of order. So we thank all members for their statements and non-statements. So I'll proceed. So during the consideration of a bill, the enacting clause and the title are postponed until all other clauses have been considered in their proper order. Also, if there is an agreement from the committee, the chair will call clauses in blocks that conform to pages with the understanding that will stop at any particular clause or clauses where members may have comments, questions, or amendments to propose. Order. Is that agreed? I will now read the clause script by script. Shall clause 1 pass? I hear a no. The floor is open for questions.
No questions, Mr. Chair, but you know, as I said before, we stand in opposition to this bill. We have at every step of the way, and we will continue to do that throughout this process, this committee process, as every member did as well.
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and we know how much misinformation was put on the record by the member for Concordia. Very unfortunate. Misconceptions about Bill 13, safety requirements, standards, workers' wages, training, recruitment targets, skilled trades for the task are all covered by legislation. They're covered by contract. The member for Concordia just wants to put misinformation on the record. And by the way, for the record, our government has put forward a budget which will spend $500 million for the year 21-22, $500 million for 22-23, $500 million for 24-25. For 23-24, pardon me, and the NDP in their first year in government, 2000-2001, spent $98 million compared to the $500 million we're spending every year. So this is a government that is building and moving things forward. This is a great piece of legislation. We recommend it strongly.
We will now proceed by the voice vote on bill clause. Shall clause 1 pass? Yes. All those in favor of the clause? 1, aye. Please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. In my opinion, the ayes have it. Clause 1 is accordingly passed. Shall clause 2 pass? Pass. I hear a no. The floor is open for questions. There are no questions?
Maybe I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Sandhu.
We have heard from all the presenters about PLA is beneficial for all Manitobans. This speaks of safe work, fair wages, skilled work, no strike, no lockout. Why the minister or this government is so worried about the unions?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Bill 13, Mr. Chair, is about choice. It's about freedom, and we even heard individuals on committee who went and stood up for our country for freedom. So this is about the freedom that you can choose to be part of an open or non-unionized company. Member for Concordia disagrees with that. He thinks you should be forced, as he thinks we should shut down any kind of discussion and debate. About choice and about freedom, I would like to say to the member he should support Bill 13. I know he's someone who supports freedoms. We've had a lot of misinformation by the member for Concordia, misconceptions put on the record that somehow safety requirements would not be adhered to, and that's covered by contract. Standards, workers' wages is covered by legislation, worker training, recruitment targets, skilled trades for the task, all covered by the agreements. And we heard from Manitoba Heavy Construction that employers have a robust education and training program. Industry works to protect their workers. They need them, and they have established a core certification program that is heralded not just in the country, but also internationally. So this is a good piece of legislation. It's about choice, it's about freedom, and we know the NDP is against that kind of stuff. They're against openness and debate and choice, and that is where they are as a party. We believe Bill 13 is a very progressive piece of legislation. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the floor? Now we'll proceed for the voice vote on Bill Clause 2. Shall Clause 2 pass?
No.
I hear no. All those in favor of Clause 2, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
In my opinion, the ayes have it. Clause 2 is accordingly passed. Shall Clauses 3 through 6 pass?
No.
I hear no. The floor is open for questions. Shall Clause 3 pass? Pass. I hear no. Is the floor open for questions? Shall Clause, hearing no further questions, we'll do a voice vote on Bill Clause number 3. Shall Clause 3 pass? Pass. All those in favor of Clause 3, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. In my opinion, the ayes have it. Clause 3 is accordingly passed. Shall Clause 4 pass? Pass. I hear no. The floor is open for questions. Shall Clause 3 pass? Sorry, correction. Seeing no questions, shall Clause 4 pass? Pass. I hear no. All those in favor of Clause 4, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. In my opinion, the ayes have it. Clause 4 is accordingly passed. Shall Clause 5 pass? Pass. I hear no. The floor is open for questions. Since there are no questions, shall Clause 5 pass? Pass. If I hear no. All those in favor of Clause 5, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. In my opinion, the ayes have it. Clause 5 is accordingly passed. Shall Clause 6 pass? No. Yes. I hear no. The floor is open for questions. Since there are no questions, shall Clause 6 pass? No. All those in favor? I hear no. All those in favor of Clause 6, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. In my opinion, the ayes have it. Clause 6 is accordingly passed. Shall the enacting clause pass? Pass. The enacting clause is accordingly passed. Shall the title pass? Pass. The title is accordingly passed. Shall the bill be reported? Agreed. The bill shall be reported. We'll now proceed on to Bill 17, clause by clause. Does the minister responsible for Bill 17 have an opening statement? The Honourable Minister.
Good evening, Chairperson, members of the committee. I am very pleased to receive or to present this bill for public input, and I'd like to thank all of those who helped us with regards to Bill 17, the Drivers and Vehicles Amendment Act. As part of Manitoba government's 100-day action plan, this legislation is required to strengthen consumer protection and compliance mechanisms for mandatory entry-level training for Class 1 truck drivers to support an approved standard of service delivery in Manitoba. Currently, driver training schools that teach mandatory entry-level training are not subject to consumer protection and compliance mechanisms under the Private Vocational Institutions Act. Bill 17 will provide financial protection for students in mandatory entry-level training and will address the current lack of compliance tools for driver training schools permitted by Manitoba Public Insurance, enabling the development of a progressive disciplinary scheme. Bill 17 was introduced into the Manitoba Legislative Assembly on October 14, 2020, and passed second reading on March 25, 2021. If Bill 17 is passed, the following amendments will be made to establish regulatory making authorities in legislation. Require surety bonds from driver training schools to provide some financial compensation to students in the event of a sudden school closure due to permit suspension, cancellation, or insolvency. Authorize administrative penalties for schools and instructors that are non-compliant with legislation, and permit conditions up to a maximum of $5,000 as part of a progressive disciplinary scheme to support school compliance and enforcement, and expand the License Suspension Appeal Board's authority to hear appeals related to administrative penalties, in addition to permit suspensions and cancellations. Administrative penalties will foster education and corrective action, ensuring that driver training school and instructor permit suspension and cancellations are only used for serious breaches of permit conditions. In addition, an appeal option will ensure procedural fairness while strengthening the compliance framework. Bill 17 will come into force on a future date set by the Manitoba government to allow time to develop regulations that will set maximum monetary amounts for administrative penalties and surety bond requirements. Bill 17 will support consistency for driver training programs delivered by private vocational institutions and other driver training schools in Manitoba, and will promote harmonization with other Canadian jurisdictions. These added safeguards for mandatory entry-level training will reinforce road safety principles identified in Manitoba's Road Safety Plan. Chairperson, members of the committee, the Manitoba government thanks all of those who participated in creating this legislation. The Manitoba government looks forward to further discussion on Bill 17, Mr. Chair, and we are very pleased that it will be going through this committee at this point in time. We'd like to thank our partnership with Manitoba Public Insurance, Crown Services, and Advanced Education Skills and Immigration to promote our shared commitment to driver education and safety on Manitoba roads.
We thank the minister. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Sandhu, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. This will amend the Driver Vehicle Act so that driving instructor or driver training school may be given an administrative penalty if they contravene this act, regulation, or a permanent condition under this act. This bill is a part of a response to the 2018 Humboldt crash. Humboldt tragedy brought into relief that provinces across Canada have not been doing an adequate enough job to ensure that coordination of proper training and regulation in the industry is a priority. This bill overall emphasizes and is a response to the need to develop stricter regulation within the industry. For example, MPI identified compliance problem with some people who were providing training. One trainer even had their license revoked. In 2019, the Manitoba government was the fourth province in Canada to announce a mandatory entry-level training for commercial truck drivers. There have been a continuous call for a graduated licensing program that account for the size and the complexity of the various size vehicle, weather, and the road condition. Unfortunately, Pallister government has often favored their bottom line over the safety of Manitobans. In 2017, they cut support for training through MPI, which were created to address a shortage of truck driver in Manitoba. These cuts came at the time when the industry was having an incredible hard time finding new local drivers. Manitobans deserve to have a government that is willing to invest in proper training to ensure that the roads are safe for everyone and to address the needs of trucking sector and on our economy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We thank the member. During the consideration of a bill, the enacting clause and title are postponed until all other clauses have been considered in their proper order. Also, if there is an agreement from the committee, the chair will call clauses in blocks that conform to pages with the understanding that we will stop at any particular clause or clauses where members may have comments, questions, or amendments to propose. Is that agreed? Agreed. Shall clauses 1 and 2 pass? No. I hear a no. Shall clause 1 pass? Pass. Shall clause 1 is accordingly passed. Shall clause 2 pass?
No. Question?
I hear a no. The floor is open for questions.
I have a
Mr.
question.
Sandhu.
Just a question. I think I asked this question during the debate. The question was why there is a limit of only $5,000 fine. Why is not higher?
The Honourable Minister.
I believe that was answered. That is the standard across the country. We believe that that is a very severe penalty, and considering that there is nothing in place right now, we believe that will suffice.
Question?
Mr. Sandhu.
So I don't know if that penalty is stiff enough. I think we need higher fines, because if there's no standard, we sort of be setting a standard for the industry to follow. And also, who will be doing the enforcement on this? Like, how will we find out if somebody is abusing the system?
The Honourable Minister.
That is done through Manitoba Public Insurance Corporation. They would be checking up on these schools, and if they find that, for instance, record keeping isn't appropriate, or there's a problem with the way that they are training, they would be levying the fine. And $5,000, I would suggest to the member, is a severe penalty.
Mr. Sandhu.
A question regarding how many people are working in MPI enforcement in regard to this kind of regulation?
The Honourable Minister.
I would suggest to the member that he's at the wrong committee for that. I would suggest he would go to Crown Corporations Committee and ask that question, where they assign employees and who they assign to what. That would be a very good question for him to raise at the Crown Corporations Committee when Manitoba Public Insurance Corporation comes in front of that committee.
No further question.
Seeing no further questions, shall clause 2 pass? Clause 2 is accordingly passed. Shall clauses 3 and 4 pass?
Pass.
Clauses 3 and 4 are accordingly passed. Shall clause 5 pass? Clause 5 is accordingly passed. Shall clauses 6 through 8 pass? Clauses 6 through 8 are accordingly passed. Shall clauses 9 and 10 pass? Clauses 9 and 10 are accordingly passed. Shall the enacting clause pass? The enacting clause is accordingly passed. Shall the title pass? The title is accordingly passed. Shall the bill be reported? The bill shall be reported. We will now move on to Bill 20, clause by clause. Does the minister responsible for Bill 20 have an opening statement? The Honourable Minister.
Bill 20 honors our government's commitment to bring forward legislative amendments to allow the safe testing of automated vehicles on Manitoba roads. This bill is intended to improve and maintain the safety and efficiency of Manitoba's transportation system in preparation for future deployment of automated vehicles in the next 10 to 20 years, and to bring new economic opportunities to the province. This legislation amends the Highway Traffic Act to allow government to develop regulations and a permit system for testing vehicle technology and vehicle types such as automated vehicles on Manitoba roads. The bill also amends the Manitoba Public Insurance Corporation Act and the Insurance Act to amend vehicle registration and insurance requirements for vehicle testing organizations. This bill is a first step to prepare the province for the introduction of automated and connected vehicle technology on roads, while ensuring alignment with other jurisdictions. A supporting regulatory framework, including a vehicle testing, technology testing, and permitting system for Manitoba's plan for development in 2021 in consultation with the public and stakeholders. Enabling developers to test emergency vehicle technologies on public roads in Manitoba will support Manitoba's large agriculture, trucking, heavy vehicle, and bus manufacturing and technology development sectors. We know many vehicle technologies are in development and ready for testing. Allowing testing in Manitoba will advance opportunities for Manitoba-based businesses. Vehicles subject to a technology testing permit will not be registered and will not be eligible for insurance under Manitoba Public Insurance Universal Automobile Insurance. testing organizations will be required to seek private third-party liability insurance to insure vehicles against injury, loss, or damage. If a testing vehicle is responsible for a collision that causes injuries or property damage, permit holders will be responsible for reimbursing Manitoba Public Insurance for injury and property damage costs to the extent that the testing vehicle is responsible for the collision. This ensures that both Manitoba Public Insurance and Manitobans are protected from any financial risk posed by testing vehicle technology on Manitoba roads. And Mr. Chair, I would like to add in here, it is very unfortunate that the ill-considered and poorly thought through filibuster by the NDP that stalled this legislation. I mentioned in the legislature we used to look at change in matter of increments of 100 years. Then it became 10 years, then became matter of years. Now we see change sometimes happening in what seems to be weeks. And the fact that this legislation was stalled by the Leader of the Opposition, the member for Concordia, very ill-considered that they would have decided to have stalled this important piece of legislation, only set Manitoba back. We have very robust manufacturing here in the province of Manitoba. We have a very robust bus manufacturing, agriculture equipment manufacturing, and I would suggest to members of this committee that agriculture is way ahead of most industries when it comes to autonomous vehicles. And for them to be able to be testing this equipment on a more open basis is important. They've been asking for this legislation. They support this legislation and are looking forward to it. And I would suggest that this legislation not be stalled any further by the NDP opposition and others, Mr. Chair. So as a final comment, I would like to thank all of those who participated in consultations on this bill. We recommend its speedy passage.
We thank the minister. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement? Mr. Wiebe.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and happy to put a few words on the record with regards to Bill 20 this evening. This bill amends the Highway Traffic Act, the Insurance Act, and the Manitoba Public Insurance Act to allow for testing of vehicles with automated driving systems or other new technology. While we agree with the need to test these vehicles with automated driving systems and other new technologies, we're concerned that the implementation of these broader regulatory powers that are included in this bill. The bill simply leaves too much up to the discretion, and the details should have been worked out before introducing this bill, rather than giving the minister the ability to work through these details through regulation. There should be clear, broad, and a comprehensive plan being put forward that we can transparently see what the minister's intentions are, rather than deferring everything to this regulation and policy framework. This bill is another example of the government giving broad regulatory powers to the minister. Other examples include Bill 33, the Advanced Education Administration Amendment Act, Bill 10, the Regional Health Authorities Amendment Act, and Bill 37, the Planning Amendment and City of Winnipeg Charter Amendment Act. This bill also doesn't seem to address some concerns the minister himself raised in 2018 on who is responsible if an autonomous vehicle hits another person or another vehicle. This is something that they should have outlined in the details of this bill, but instead have decided to keep Manitobans in the dark. There are also some concerns about the lack of autonomous vehicle testing in snowy climates, which is another issue this minister has failed to address in this legislation. As the minister mentioned, this is one of the bills that got held over from last year, and it's quite surprising that despite his now claim that he's concerned about moving this through quickly, he was willing to walk away from this legislation, prorogue the legislature, and dump this bill in the trash to only be reintroduced in this current session. And though we gave him an additional year to clarify and codify some of the concerns that we had, that others have about this exciting new technology, he failed to use that time. And just like how he was unprepared to speak to his own bill on Bill 13, he was unprepared to make this bill better and work with the opposition, work with industry, and work with so many who want to see this move forward. Instead, he threw it in the trash, walked away, and brought forward the exact same bill. And I think that that's irresponsible. It is an important and exciting new field. I think it might be a generational thing, but definitely I think younger folks are very excited about autonomous vehicles and the potential. The minister mentioned New Flyer. Well, he didn't mention them by name, but I think he was alluding to the work that they're doing. We've had a chance to talk to them and very excited by the work they're doing. We're certainly eager to work with them, even if this current government seems not to be as eager to do that. As I said, we're happy to move this forward. If the minister had brought this to our table in the fall and said, this is a priority, he knows that we would have passed it along. Instead, he threw it in the trash because his boss picked up his ball and walked away. It's unfortunate that politics get ahead of getting things done around here sometimes, but we're going to stand and move this along and hopefully get this moving forward in this province. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We thank the member. During the consideration of a bill, the enacting clause and title are postponed until all other clauses have been considered in their proper order. Also, if there is an agreement from the committee, the chair will call clauses in blocks that conform to pages with the understanding that we will stop at any particular clause or clauses where members may have comments, questions, or amendments to propose. Is that agreed? Shall clauses 1 and 2 pass? Clauses 1 and 2 are accordingly passed. Shall clauses 3 through 5 pass? Clauses 3 through 5 are accordingly passed. Shall clauses 6 through 10 pass? Clauses 6 through 10 are accordingly passed. Shall clauses 11 and 12 pass? Clauses 11 and 12 are accordingly passed. Shall clause 13 pass? Clause 13 is accordingly passed. Shall the enacting clause pass? The enacting clause is accordingly passed. Shall the title pass? The title is accordingly passed. Shall the bill be reported? Agreed. The bill should be reported. We will now carry on with Bill 23. Does the minister responsible for Bill 23 have an opening statement? I do. The Honourable Minister.
As part of the Manitoba government's commitment to enhance, as soon as the frat boy is done heckling, I will start my presentation.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
On a point of order.
You know, I know the minister has been heckling across the table all evening, but to address another member of this committee by a nickname like that, I mean, it's totally inappropriate. I think members of this committee will attest to the fact that I've carried myself under the rules in an appropriate way, standing up for the constituents who have come here before us. That is totally out of line, Mr. Chair. I call this member, I would ask that this member be called to order on that. Like,
Mr. On a point of order?
That's not cool.
On the same point of order, the member has been heckling all evening long, and his behavior is defined very poorly. He knows much better than that, and I know he's frustrated that he is responsible for this legislation, particular Bill 23 being held over, which is important legislation, including all the other pieces. And frankly, I think we should move on.
You can't call names of the
I think we should consider a source and move on.
Chair will speak. All night I've been hearing heckling on both sides. However, when the member was speaking, let's just keep it respectable so that we can carry on with these clauses. So, Minister, please make your opening statement. Order. Order. Order.
You done?
Order. 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 I said order. Minister, please continue on with your opening statement.
Can I proceed?
Yeah, say it again.
Speak to the chair, please. Carry on, Minister.
As part of the Manitoba government's commitment to enhance film and television industry production in the province, this legislation will assist the industry with acquiring traffic control services when a production requires the use of a roadway in the province. The bill will allow a traffic authority, either the Manitoba government for provincial roads and highways, or a city, town, or municipality for municipal roads, to authorize a company to use qualified flag persons to control traffic. This will be done by means of a permit from the traffic authority. Currently, under the Highway Traffic Act, traffic control is limited to local police, RCMP firefighters, in case of an emergency, railway companies, and companies performing road maintenance and construction. These legislative changes expand the scope of who can control traffic. The bill provides more options and flexibility to other organizations, such as film production companies that want to film their movie in Manitoba but require traffic control in order to do so. We have experienced tremendous growth and interest in film production across the province. In fact, Budget 21-22 enhances that even further to encourage even more film production, which means that this legislation is even more necessary. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the film and video industry in Manitoba generated over $260 million. We know there have been times in recent past where a company interested in filming in our province was unable to secure traffic control services because law enforcement officers were not available. This will no longer be the case with this amended legislation. It will also lessen the demand on law enforcement to provide traffic control services in those cases where there is minimal safety risk to the public. Flag persons will need to hold a valid flag person certificate from an accredited training provider. The province's Workplace Safety and Health branch approves all flag person training providers in the province and will continue to do so. We believe that Bill 23 has strong support from a wide range of stakeholders, including the film and video production industry. Stakeholders have told us that empowering a traffic authority to allow flag persons to control traffic on roads will both support the film industry and potentially generate cost savings for productions, while lowering the demand on law enforcement so they can focus on core public safety areas. Demand and interest from film production is expected to grow in this province as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic and with the incentives from Budget 2021-22. Without these legislative changes, companies may decide to forego Manitoba as a production location if they face challenges in securing traffic control services. Thus, Mr. Chair, it is important that we stop stalling the important legislation in front of us, which was done by the member for Concordia and the NDP. This would have a negative effect on Manitoba's ability to increase economic development in the film and video sector. These legislative amendments come to ensure traffic safety by authorizing the traffic authority to permit the use of flag persons on a case-by-case basis. The changes will be particularly helpful in alleviating demand on law enforcement in rural Manitoba, where providing traffic control services to the film industry is not a core service. This supports Manitoba's policing and public safety strategy, which includes the priorities of improving traffic safety and alleviating demands on police to perform non-core duties. As a final comment, I would like to thank all of those who provided input and support for this bill.
We thank the minister. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement? Mr. Weeb.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it sounded to me like maybe the minister was using the exact same speech that he gave at second reading on this bill. I may be wrong. I'll give him some credit there that he may have changed it up a bit, but I'm going to say the same thing that I said with regards to some of the concerns around Bill 23. You know, I'll start by saying that we certainly see the value to this. I think I shared at second reading that as a Folk Fest volunteer for very, very long, many years, that I know the good work that people do to keep people safe at festivals and other get-togethers in Manitoba. There's certainly a lot of value to giving them more ability to control traffic. And with regards to the film industry, you know, I think there's a lot of value there to make sure that we can encourage productions and allow them to operate in a way that's both safe and is also helps their industry grow. My concern that I'll put on the record again is ensuring that this is done safely. I think the minister's heard that message loud and clear here tonight. But on this bill in particular, I think there's you know, a requirement for training and a requirement for proper reflective gear and designated gear. I think, again, he's heard those messages, so I think I'll leave it very short. And the only other criticism I'll have is that, once again, we see the government bending over backwards to work with the film industry, which we're certainly not criticizing, but other industries who have been asking throughout the pandemic to have other considerations and have the government work with them in the same way have gone completely unheeded. So there is a lot to be concerned about with regards to that. But with regards to Bill 23, we support this and want to see it move forward quickly.
We thank the member. During the consideration of a bill, the enacting clause and the title are postponed until all other clauses have been considered in their proper order. Also, if there is an agreement from the committee, the chair will call clauses in blocks that conform to pages, with the understanding that we will stop at any particular clause or clauses where members may have comments, questions, or amendments to propose. Is that agreed? Agreed. Shall clauses 1 and 2 pass? Clauses 1 and 2 are accordingly passed. Shall clauses 3 through 6 pass? Clause 3 through 6 are accordingly passed. Shall clause 7 pass? Clause 7 is accordingly passed. Shall the enacting clause pass? The enacting clause is accordingly passed. Shall the title pass? The title is accordingly passed. Shall the bill be reported? The bill shall be reported. Now I'll continue on with Bill 28, clause by clause. Does the minister responsible for Bill 28 have an opening statement? I do. The Honourable Minister.
This legislation will strengthen administration and stewardship of provincial water infrastructure, including provincial waterways and provincial water control works. This bill also provides government increased powers to manage and protect provincial water infrastructure, including flood infrastructure and the numerous drains that support agriculture production across our province. Provincial water infrastructure consists of water control works under the government's control, as well as any lakes, rivers, or other water channels that are designated as provincial waterways. Manitoba Infrastructure is responsible for the construction, operation, and stewardship of provincial water control infrastructure, with an estimated asset value of approximately $7 billion. Given the role and value of these assets, it is crucial that the province take steps to protect this valuable infrastructure. Provincial water infrastructure includes more than 4,750 kilometers of provincial waterways, 425 kilometers of linear river dikes, 90 provincial dams, 8 diversions, and 19 community ring dikes, numerous reservoirs and pumping stations, and many through dike culverts, drain crossings, and other water control structures. Collectively, this infrastructure is critical to providing flood protection for Manitobans, drainage to support Manitoba's agriculture sector, recreational opportunities, and connectivity for smaller rural transportation networks. In the recent past, prohibited and harmful activities have occurred on provincial water infrastructure. Government and taxpayers are paying the cost to repair and remediate this inadvertent or deliberate damage. There are many examples of prohibited activities occurring on provincial waterways without any consequence because of the Act's insufficient enforcement provisions, such as a person excavated a significant amount of soil from a provincial dike for their own purposes and sold it as fill. Mr. Chair, that meant not just did the taxpayers have to pay to have it put back and packed, it actually put that community at risk. Had there been a major high water event, it could have been very expensive. It could have been fatal. Another case, a person dumped boulders in a provincial waterway, resulting in obstruction and necessary removal by the province at a cost. Again, Mr. Chairman, this is very dangerous behavior that if you're blocking a provincial waterway or a pipe, it is there for a reason. It's been engineered and it is there to take off water when it is most needed. This was a very irresponsible and dangerous action. Another situation, a person established campground sites on a provincial waterway adjacent to a private campground and charged a fee for the site to use it. Irresponsible at best. Last example, a person drilled a private well through a dike, resulting in damage to the integrity of the dike and necessary repairs at taxpayers' expense. I would say, through you, Mr. Chair, to the committee, these dikes are structurally very sound. They are built in such a way that they can take immense amount of pressure. They are developed and done so in such a way that it takes currents, it takes pressure, grasses and weeds are allowed to grow on it so that there's a good root network in the dam. And to drill anything into one of these structures is very dangerous. And again, had we had a high water event, this could have ended up being catastrophic for the community. It was irresponsible and cannot be allowed to happen. Thus, this bill strengthens enforcement provisions, including the designations of officers, stronger mechanisms to recover costs for damage and repair, and the ability to establish fines to deter harmful activities on provincial waterways. This will reduce stewardship costs for government and increase the quality and longevity of provincial water infrastructure. The bill also provides clear prohibitions for activities on provincial waterways and specifies the type of activities that can be undertaken with a permit. Furthermore, the bill allows the minister to prohibit or restrict public access to provincial water infrastructure through a temporary ministerial order. This will protect public safety where there is a significant risk, such as during a high water event or flood. To be very clear, when we have a serious situation like a high water event or even a flood, we do not want sea-doos or boats or any kind of pleasure craft, any craft of any kind on our waterways, because that adds to the danger of the situation. There are individuals that are tasked with protecting these communities, and they need access often very quickly and quite immediately. So we would suggest to committee this is a very important part of this legislation. We believe that Bill 28 has strong support from a wide range of stakeholders who recognize that the maintaining the quality and health of provincial water infrastructure supports flood protection, agriculture production, a secure water supply, and public safety. I would also like to point out, committee, that we be very clear in all of the legislation that we've been talking about, that regulations must be drafted after legislation is passed. For the member for Concordia, I know he's been here for a while, but sometimes we forget how things line up. So first legislation comes to this legislature, and it does allow for amendments to come forward, so we do not draft regulations until the legislation is passed. After the regulations are written, after the law is passed and regulations are written, they must go for public consultation for 40 days and then must be considered when the regulations are finally ready to go, and then they are posted, and it is a very open and public process. But again, regulations are drafted after legislation is passed. As a final comment, I would like to thank all those who participated in consultations on this bill.
We thank the minister. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement? Mr. Wiebe.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And this bill, Bill 28, gives the Palliser government increased powers over water control works and over provincial water infrastructure. Currently, only local authorities may enter into an agreement with the government for the construction or operation of a water control work, including a cost-sharing arrangement. Other parties will now be able to enter into such an agreement. The government may issue a repair or removal order to a person for anything done without a permit. Failure to comply with this order may result in the government performing the work at the person's expense. Public access to provincial water infrastructure can also be prohibited or restricted by ministerial order for up to 90 days. We know that it is best for Manitobans when all levels of government can cooperate. Unfortunately, this government, the Palliser government, doesn't like to work with municipal governments and continues to pass legislation that makes it easier for the province to go over the heads of municipalities. This bill would explicitly give the minister the ability to cut municipalities out of the decision-making on water control structures and authorize work without the municipality's agreement. Section 6.1 currently requires the province to enter into an agreement with the local authority. The Palliser government wants to end this cooperative approach. The minister would also have the authority to decide who gets what contracts without consulting the affected municipality. On top of this, the minister can still force the municipality to pick up part or all of the costs. This bill removes Section 7 of the current Act, which established how contracts should be established between the province and municipalities for water control works. These provisions are no longer required, as the government is giving itself the ability to cut out municipalities, hire the work themselves, and bill back to municipalities for all or part of the work. This bill represents a significant weakening of the role of local RMs, and also their ability to encourage local economic development, as normally municipalities might contract locally for such work. Bill 28 also gives significant power to the minister to take property. Previously, the minister was restricted to the requirements of the Land Acquisition Act. This bill removes that, giving broad discretion, again, to the minister. This government keeps introducing bill after bill that would legislate a significant overreach of the minister's authority over municipalities. This raises the question, why can't the Palliser government simply work with municipalities to come to an agreement on these matters rather than giving themselves such broad, unbridled power. I'd like to thank the committee this evening for the time to consider this bill. We do have some concerns with this, as we do with many others, but we would like to see it move forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
We thank the member. During the consideration of a bill, the enacting clause and the title are postponed until all other clauses have been considered in their proper order. Also, if there is an agreement from the committee, the chair will call clauses in blocks that conform to pages, with the understanding that we will stop at any particular clause or clauses where members may have comments, questions, or amendments to propose. Is that agreed? Agreed. Shall clauses 1 and 2 pass? Agreed. Clauses 1 and 2 are accordingly passed. Shall clause 3 pass? Clause 3 is accordingly passed. Shall clauses 4 through 8 pass? Clauses 4 through 8 are accordingly passed. Shall clauses 9 through 11 pass? Clauses 9 through 11 are accordingly passed. Shall clause 12 pass? Clause 12 is accordingly passed. Shall clauses 13 through 17 pass? Clauses 13 through 17 are accordingly passed. Shall clauses 18 and 19 pass? Clauses 18 and 19 are accordingly passed. Shall clauses 20 and 21 pass? Clauses 20 and 21 are accordingly passed. Shall clause 22 pass? Clause 22 is accordingly passed. Shall clause 23 pass? Clause 23 is accordingly passed. Shall clause 24 pass? Clause 24 is accordingly passed. Shall clause 25 pass? Clause 25 is accordingly passed. Shall clauses 26 and 27 pass? Clauses 26 and 27 are accordingly passed. Shall clauses 28 and 29 pass? Clause 28 and 29 are accordingly passed. Shall clause 30 and 31 pass? Clauses 30 and 31 are accordingly passed. Shall the enacting clause pass? The enacting clause is accordingly passed. Shall the title pass? The title is accordingly passed. Shall the bill be reported? Agreed. The bill shall be reported. The hour being 9 p.m., what is the will of the committee? Committee rise.